Welcome, everyone, to the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is a Monday, so of course, we are going to be getting into some recruiting. This is the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Appreciate everyone for popping in. Before we get started on today's podcast, where we will be breaking down a little bit of film with Jaiden Ausberry and discussing recent recruiting ranking shifts, please ask if you could please like, share, subscribe to this podcast. Hit that notification bell if you are watching us on YouTube. That way, anytime that you get a podcast update, because for sometimes we love football, we're just going to randomly come on and talk ball. So if you want to hit that notification bell, you get that instant notification that we are going live and we are doing our thing. Also, if you are listening on one of the great recruiting platforms, one of the great podcast platforms over there, if you give us a 5-star rating, we would genuinely appreciate that as we continue to grow this show and the site, irishbreakdown.com. So, Brian, we are getting into a little bit of film action. We were discussing this last night, and we're like, what better way to start a week than get into the film room a little bit? So we're going to be talking to little Jaiden Ausberry, breaking him down, obviously, linebacker out of University Lab in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who is high on Notre Dame. Notre Dame is high on him, and we hope that we are going to be hearing some decision from him sometime in the near future. But, Brian, before we start, as we always do, we had a nice little phone conversation earlier today discussing some of the frustrations that follows recruiting rankings, as we always do. So,
yeah,
Brian, I know that you
and speaking of that, I think the we can feel better about Jaiden Ausberry becoming ending up at Notre Dame because 247 just dropped him 104 spots in their latest ranking updates after everyone agreed that he was the best linebacker at the Future 50. So that's usually a good sign that a guy's going to pick Notre Dame when he gets dropped in the rankings. So yes. we're going to have some fun talking about rankings today. There's no doubt.
Little yes, it is a little indicator there. Maybe we'll see what happens, but this is, so On3 comes out with the recruiting rankings. We of course had some initial reactions to where some of the Notre Dame players and just general, honestly, where some players shifted just in general, not necessarily just Notre Dame players. And then 247 comes back and they say, we also have to have a recruiting update because this is what we do. This is the business. And some other interesting rankings to follow. So, Brian, before we start the show, just so everybody can kind of get a peek behind the scenes, a little peek behind the curtain, Brian was pretty juiced up, man. He was ready to go. He was ready to talk about some of these rankings.
It's just so dumb. I mean, that's my thing is like, first of all, how many different updates can you do in an off season where kids actually haven't put pads on?
Right.
Like this is like the third or fourth different time they've updated their rankings, which to me is just absurd. And some of these guys that are getting their rankings affected by, I still don't know what. It just the whole process is just kind of like, it's so the frustrating thing is people put so much into this stuff and it's become so geared more towards clickbait and who you talk to and who's at this event or that event or who's at this school or that school that it's become less and less about the respect for getting it right. And then the way that some of these kids get dropped, like, for example, we're going to talk about Drake Bowen. Drake Bowen got dropped about 70 spots in the latest 247 rankings. Based on what? He's been playing baseball off season, right? So, like, what have you seen in this update that you didn't already know about him from the last time you saw him play football, right? Like, what about him all of a sudden makes him, like, in the previous two ranking updates at 247, they had him, Drake Bowen, for example, ranked 75th and then 76, right? So he's been kind of around that area. Now, all of a sudden, randomly, he drops all the way to 143 based on what? He's played zero football. It's not like he went to a 7-on-7 camp and didn't look good. It's not like he went to a rivals camp or an Under Armour camp and didn't look good. He's been literally playing baseball. So did you not think he was fast enough stealing second at a baseball game you saw him at? Did he take a bad angle to a ball in the hole or something like that? Like, did he chase a slider on for a strike three and in the dirt or something? Like, what could you possibly have seen to jump him from where he was to what you have him now? And so, some of it works out well for Notre Dame guys. Some guys jump up. Joe Otting is now a 4-star, number 224 player in the country. And apparently, according to 247, he's 14 spots higher than Jaden Greathouse. So, I mean, just the way that they go about it is just, it's so weird. Ryan Yates still is 33. Ryan Yates is 33 spots ahead of Jaden Greathouse in the 247 rankings.
I mean, my instant react, and I think that we should.
The best was
You
your
sh-
reaction, Ryan, when I told
I
you the Peyton
know,
Bowen
man.
rankings. That
I-
please share your reaction to that, because he's up to a 5-star and 2-4 and on 3, but he
yeah.
drops 10 spots from 247.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we and Brian put it out in an article this morning, a little bit of a couple of the risers. You know, now Notre Dame has 3 players that are ranked inside the top 18 players in the 2023 class, which is fantastic. That's the exciting part,
Yeah.
right? On 3, you're just like
Nobody else has. Only one school has 2.
yeah.
Right.
And Brian, we talked about this before, you know, the guys that have most likely to make an ascension to 5-star status. And I know we've talked a little bit about that. Peyton Bowen has that type of skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a incredibly gifted and talented football player. And he's had a good offseason. I know he was just at the Future 50 and he looked great there, you know, from everything that we have heard from that sense. So I wasn't generally surprised. I maybe a little 18, I was like, wow, he really shot up, right? Like it was a little bit of a shock, I guess, that he had jumped quite that much, but I wasn't shocked that he jumped up after everything that we've heard and the skill set he has. But then make it make sense to me that the same day on 3's like, wow, you've looked great this offseason. You just look great at this event. We're shooting you up to number 18.
Yeah.
That in return, 247's like, nah, we don't see it from you, man. We're dropping you to 80 something. Like what?
Right.
How can those things align? How can those things mesh? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
And what did Brennan Vernon do to go from being number 212 to not even being ranked anymore?
Crazy.
Like he hasn't been in a single event. So now you're punishing kids, a defensive lineman, for not going to an event to work out with no pads on. You know, it just the whole process is just screwed up, in my opinion. And like you said, Ryan, like look, I get it. Like different people can have different opinions. I get that. But some of the variation in rankings is just getting absurd. For example, how can 247 have Micah Bell ranked in the same place nationally, number 67, that on 3 has him ranked in the state of Texas, number 67? Right? Like this stuff is just it's just getting so screwy. And the frustrating thing for me is I don't care, to be honest with you, but then what we get so many comments, well, this guy's this or that guy's that because of this. And here's the other thing. In this era of NIL, it is especially impactful because a lot of what kids' reputations are based off of is their high school recruiting rankings and where they're going to college. And so when you see these things, it's really frustrating. It really is. And just the lack of consistency with it. And just, yeah, I mean, there's always been a difference, Ryan, in how one service ranks a kid compared to another. But when you just see these crazy variances, it just becomes a little nuts. Do you want to go through and well, I'm sorry, we'll finish what you're saying. We'll go through and kind of go through the updates that we've seen.
Yeah, I would love to go through the rankings a little bit just to give it a little context. I was just going to say, I mean, on 3 even has that NIL, like what would you even call that? Like a calculator, I guess.
Yeah,
like they kind of determines.
Absurd. Yeah.
And we never even talked about this on the show, but you're literally putting a price on a player's worth, which is kind of weird to me. Just a 17-year-old kid, a 16-year-old kid, like putting their worth out there. It's kind of an odd distinction to me.
And how they base it, it's screwy. I don't even really. I mean, it's just. I mean, I get what they're trying to get noticed and all this other stuff, but it's just it's creepy, it's weird, and it's I mean,
I think creepy is the best word, honestly.
Yeah.
Creepy is the best word for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, my last thing is like, before we get into some of the more specific rankings, when we're talking about how these guys are ranked, it really drives me crazy because I think that we glorify the 7-on-7 and camp circuit just in general, because at the end of the day, it matters what's going on between the lines. Obviously, right? Like we're traditionalists. I'm a purist in that way. But I don't understand. So like, all right, a player goes to a camp, has a bad showing, he's dropped a little bit. Okay, that's fine. I can get that to a degree. But if a player's not at an event, what has changed your opinion on him since you last saw him on the field, which gave you your initial opinion on him? It just doesn't make any sense. So it's
I understand that sometimes, like, look, I haven't seen the kid, so I'm not going to change my ranking of him. But some other kids are graded out higher. So for example, Elijah Page goes from 223 to 237. That's 14 spots. Like, to me, I could make a case. Boubacar Traore goes from 4 to 93. That to me is more about just, okay, some guys leaped him based on we do have new intel. Your grade hasn't changed, but some other guys, have seen their rankings go up because they did things. That's fine.
Sure.
That's fair, right?
Yep.
But some of this stuff is just like blatantly absurd. I mean, to drop a guy like, Drake Bowen's the big one. You dropped him 70 spots essentially. It is just really, really weird. And again, there's several, like Braylon James and Rivals went from like number 76 to 200 something. Like Caleb Beasley in the 2024 class, he was ranked number 42 overall, and then by Rivals. And then when they did their most recent rankings update, they dropped him out of the 250 completely. Based on what? I mean, everything I've seen, he's done pretty good at these camps. So
Sure.
those are just weird things where you're taking something that a kid did in pads and you're changing them. Like, Braylon James dropping 32 spots to number 276 is just, or 278 and on 3 is just weird to me, and Jaden Greathouse jumps up 37 based on, again, we're being based on what?
Right.
Like how many, like I said, well, we've seen, I mean, do you see new film of him? I don't think he's at 7-on-7s. I don't think he's at these. I mean, what have you seen from Jaden Greathouse to make you bump him up that high? What have you seen from Charles Jagasol to make him go from 64 to 25 in an update that you've done? Wrestling's been over since the last update. I mean, they've done an update since his wrestling was over. Could it possibly be based on? He doesn't go to camps, so this stuff is just screwy. But people are going to base their opinions on where kids are ranked. And, but it's it's a frustrating there, but I do kind of want to go over some of the changes. So we'll do, you want to do on 3 first, Ryan? You want to do on 3 first?
Yeah. Sorry. My
Okay.
internet seems to be cutting out a little bit.
No worries.
But yeah, let's, on 3 sounds like a good way to start. I mean, I guess starting with the positives is always a good thing, right, Brian? I mean,
yeah, well, Notre Dame, I mean, on 3 has some really good stuff in there for Notre Dame. I mean, I don't think this is a pro Notre Dame, anti Notre Dame thing, because it's with on 3 and 247 both. There's guys moving up and guys moving down. This isn't like Rivals back in the day where literally like 11 Notre Dame commits will all fall. This isn't that kind of thing. So it is. I mean, there is some good and some bad, but there's mostly good. And number 1 is Notre Dame is tied with Ohio State for the most players in the on 3 top 300, which is 13. I haven't configured the 247 yet because that came out like right before the show, or at least I saw it right before the show was about to start. Georgia has 9 players in the top 300. LSU has 9. Texas has 8. Alabama has 7. USC has 6. Notre Dame and Ohio State are tied with 13. Notre Dame is also second behind Ohio State with 6 top 100 players. Notre Dame is the only team with 2 players in the top 10. They're the only team with 3 players in the top 20. So obviously they now have 3 Notre Dame players ranked in the top 20. They're now 3 5-stars. Keon Keeley stayed at number 3. Charles Jagasol moved up a spot to number 6. And then Peyton Bowen had a 19-person jump to 37 from 37 to 18. Now, again, Peyton Bowen's a guy that you can understand him going up or down because he's been at a lot of different events. He's been at 7-on-7s. He was at the Future 50 and those type of things. And from everything I read, he was the second fastest. Brian Smith was there. He said he had the second fastest 40 time. I don't know if it was like they all ran 40s and he was second fastest, or it sounds like it might have been like a sprint and they raced.
Like a race.
Yeah, and there was like only one guy that beat him. I don't know if that's how it went. It is confusing the different ways that I read it, but he had the second fastest time there and was the standout. So, I mean, you understand why on 3, who already had him highest than anybody else anyway, rightfully so at 37, moved him up to 18. Sullivan Absher is next. He jumped up 21 spots to number 77. Christian Gray jumped up 71 spots to number 79. And again, this is why we're saying this isn't a, oh, gee, you're hating on Notre Dame. There's some really good stuff in here for Notre Dame. Sure. It's just the process of, I mean, I don't get
how do we get here? How do we get here?
Right.
Is the question. Yeah,
right.
No, I totally get that.
And so the 6th guy in the top 100 is Boubacar Traore, who dropped 16 spots, number 99. Again, that's most likely like a 15 spot drop, 16 spot drop is to me more of a other guys have kind of jumped up that we've seen
because this is like an identification, like evaluation period too, right? Like that's the one good thing about these camps and stuff is that like some guys are maybe just getting on your radar a little bit, or you have seen a jump from a physical stature perspective, or just from a athleticism perspective. Like
Right.
that stuff does happen. So there's certainly merit.
And some guys are going to
opinion.
fall that don't get seen by other guys that have gotten seen. So I'm okay with that one. Jaden Greathouse goes up 37 to number 154. Brendan Vernon fell 6 spots to number 186, which tells me that's I disagree with where he's ranked, but it's a 6 guys just jumped him based on what they've done. I'm okay with that. That's different than having him 212 and then completely taking him out of your top 247, like 247 Sports did. Drake Bowen fell 14 spots to number 234, which is just patently absurd. But again, that's a normal. Other guys just have been seen. Drake's been playing baseball. These guys have been seen. They jumped ahead of him. I can live with that.
234 in a vacuum is ridiculous.
Is
though.
insane.
It's so ridiculous. Yeah.
Devin Houston is, like you made the case, Ryan, like you're talking about Drake Bowen, if with a good senior season, is jumping up to a 5-star. That's your evaluation. And I would tend to agree with you because we thought him and Peyton Bowen were 2 guys that were like borderline 5-star guys. Mm-hmm. And, obviously I'm not going to jump him up because he hasn't played any football. So I'm not going to change that opinion. We'll see in the fall. And other people are just like completely dropping him out, which is, I just think, a little absurd. Devin Houston went up 11 spots, number 261. Braylon James fell 32 spots, number 278. Rico Flores fell 23 spots, number 289. And Adon Schuler fell 6 spots, number 294, which is, again, a typical, just some people have passed him because he hasn't been doing anything like that this summer. And then if you look at some of the other Notre Dame targets, Jeremiah Love fell 5 spots from number 102 to number 107. Jaiden Ausberry fell, looks like 48 spots to number 219. And then Samuel Mpemba is up 9 spots from 103 to 94. And then I don't know what Austin Novosad's ranking was.
I saw, I don't know what it was prior, but Brandon said that he was in the top 100 on 247 now.
Yeah, and he's 188th on 3. I don't know what it was before. So I can't tell you what he is. Kenny Minchie also jumped into the top 300 from on 3 to number 376. That is higher than he was before. Obviously, he was a consensus 3. I think only one service had him as a 4-star, and it wasn't on 3. So they've updated him in that as well. So Minchie is not in the top 247 for 247 because he's committed to Pitt and it doesn't get clicks. So if you want to look at the that's on 3. If you look at the top 247, let's actually, I'm just going to pull this up. Just give me a second to move this over to another thing so I can sort it. That way I can kind of just go who's the highest ranked to the lowest ranked. So if you look at that, you've got, let's see here. All right. So you've got number 1 is Keon Keeley at number 7. So he's up 2 spots. Mm-hmm. And then next you have Charles Jagasaw is the second ranked Notre Dame player. He's up to number 25 after being number 64 before. Next on the list is Micah Bell, who fell 12 spots to number 67 after a dominant track season. Peyton Bowen fell 9 spots from number 75 to number 84. And Ryan, I don't see how that happens.
I just don't know how 2 different platforms can have such a varying opinion like that. Like it's just it's so weird to me. Just so weird.
Like if you were to just tell me without any context, they have him 84th and the other has him 18th. All right, that's different, but whatever. One likes him more. But then you're going to show me one jumped him way up and one dropped him down about 10 spots. Right. It just doesn't make any sense. 100%. Next is Boubacar Traore, who is number 93, which means he is ranked in the top 100 by 2 different services. Nice. Braylon James actually went up 4 spots to number 96. Another one. How does one jump him up to 96 and the other one drops him 30-some spots to whatever 96?
He's in the 200s compared to the 96.
Almost out of the ranking. Yeah. Cooper Flanagan dropped 12 spots, number 123. Christian Gray went up 29 spots to number 131. Drake Bowen fell 67 spots to number 143. Sullivan Absher went up 23 spots to number 184. Devin Houston fell 3 spots to number 192. Joe Otting went from a 3-star player to he's now a 4-star, ranked number 224 in the country. So good for Joe Otting.
For sure.
Adon Schuler fell, let's see here, 35 spots to number 229. Elijah Page dropped 14 spots to 237. Jaden Greathouse fell. Again, how does one put him up 30 spots and the other one drops him 13 spots? He fell to 238.
Is this fair to say, Brian? Do you feel like guys that don't tackle the circuit, like they're the ones that get kind of pushed as much?
By
like,
some.
Because everybody that you just named that's taken a massive drop, they're pretty much the kids that just don't care about going to those circuits and whatnot,
Yeah, but then like Joe Otting hasn't done that stuff, and he jumps way up, so it just doesn't say. In part of it, if you knew behind the curtains a little bit of how some of this is done, it's also some people have. That's my guy. I'm going to advocate for my guy.
Sure.
So Jaden Greathouse's Rico Flores is just up a spot to 246. And then Jay Lamar is at 247. Or actually, they were up, and then they went down. So they've been around that 246, 247. Now, here's the good part. 17 of Notre Dame's 20 commitments are ranked as top 247 players. That does not include Brendan Vernon. Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even know what to say about that, man. He is the most criminal. He went from a little semi overrated to criminally underrated
by rivals. I think he was a little bit overrated by rivals because they had him in the top 10.
Yep.
And we both thought he was like a top 100 player, no doubt, but not a 5-star, which I think is a fair. Now it's just absurd, some of the ranking drops that he's going through. So, it's
my favorite is still Micah Bell. It's my favorite. Ranking discrimination.
I wonder if they've updated like all their guys. I'm going to go to his On3 page. If like they only ranked like updated the top guys and if they changed his ranking or not. Yeah, he's still 67th in the state of Texas. He's 67th in the state of Texas, but on 24 has him 67th in the country.
All I have to say is that this is more reason why Notre Dame needs to recruit Texas. There's 67 players,
apparently
66 players better in the state of Texas than Micah Bell.
Here's the funny part, right? Here's what makes some of this absurd, Ryan. We're having some fun today. Micah Bell ran a 10.4 and a 20.89, which I saw a thing that said he had one of the 5 to 10 fastest 200-meter times in the entire country.
It's incredible. Yeah, that because everyone wants to talk about the 10.400, which is a great time, but sub 21 in the 2 is stupid fast.
Well below 21. Here's the best part. 247 is the one outlet that I think ranks Micah Bell relatively appropriately at number 67. Yet one of their writers who used to cover Notre Dame wrote an article about the fastest players in the country, and he listed like 8 or 9 guys and then listed a bunch of, because somebody sent me this, like, dude, you got to read this nonsense. Then he listed a bunch of like, other guys to think about, and not Micah Bell didn't even get mentioned in the others to know category. And he's talking about he's talking about track times that aren't even close to what Micah Bell is putting up. And it's just like, this is what people want to know why I get frustrated when people are like, well, this site's reporting this and this site's saying this. What do you have to say about it? And I'm just like, I'm tired of answering questions about people that just aren't good at this or have agendas. And that's the reality of it, is some of this stuff is just absurd. And some of this stuff is just,
I guess it did elicit its reaction, though. I mean, we've spent 24 minutes talking about it right now. So
yeah,
I guess
it is. Then that's why they do it. That's why they do it. It's for clicks. That's why that dude that covers Michigan does what he does. It's so people will talk about it and get clicks. And we don't do that, right? We're gonna provide intel, but I think we're going to talk about that. But we've talked a lot about the negatives. But again, if we're going to just take that away in our opinion of this whole thing, there's a lot of good in this for Notre Dame. You're talking about 6 kids in the top 100 according to On3. You're talking about Notre Dame having, 6 kids in the top 100 by 247. That's really good. 17 of your 20 commits are ranked among the 250 best players in the country. And for all we know, it could be 18 because maybe Brendan Vernon's like 249th, right? Because they only rank 247 guys, which I find that, like, get over yourselves. You don't need to only rank 247 guys, right? Like, give us an even number, please. But,
it's their brand,
that's
Brian.
It's a high quality group. Whatever we think about 247 and On3 and all this other kind of stuff, the reality is what everyone is saying about this class is it's loaded. Nobody has more ESPN 300 guys. Nobody has more On 3 top 100 guys. And I'd be willing to bet you that nobody has more. I mean, Notre Dame has 17 kids in the top 247. Most teams don't even have 17 kids committed.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to assume that they're the highest there. I mean, so again, this is good for Notre Dame. This is good for Notre Dame. And, and somebody asked about SI All-American. Our rankings will come out sometime in August. We're just now kind of starting to have some conversations and things about that. So we'll have those things. And we'll do one before the season, then one after the season, and that's it. Right. So that's it's based on we try to do, because it's meant to be a legitimate ranking, not a clickbait thing where we update it 14 times throughout the course of the year because we don't have anything else better to do in July. So that's where things stand. So those are the rankings updates. I would imagine somebody's going to, Rivals is probably going to come out with a new one here again soon for some reason or another.
Is ESPN ever going to bring a new ranking out? Or
they did about a month ago. Yeah.
Did they?
They did. Yeah. And they had some guys. I mean,
ESPN.
The ESPN actually, if people are curious about that, their rankings are a little bit interesting. They have Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse both in the top 100. Braylon ranks 46th. Jaden is 85th. They have Keon Keeley ranked 23rd. There are not 22 players in the country better than Keon Keeley. They have Drake Bowen in the top 100. They have Peyton Bowen ranked 49th. They have Brendan Vernon ranked 104th, which is, I would say that's reasonable. I would have him a little bit higher, but I'm not going to argue the 104th because you may be 15. If you're within 15 to 20 spots of where I think a guy should be, I don't really say that I disagree with that. It's in the range. And we often do that. We'll say like 50 to 75 range. Well, 50, 75, that's a 25 spot difference. I mean, that's a big difference. But I think that's where you can kind of leave some. You always have to be willing to leave some room for just different opinions and different impressions. And it's like, hey, I agree with you on that kid, but I disagree with you on that kid. That's why this kid's not there, because I think these other 10 kids I actually think are better, even though we agree on this other kid. Yeah. But they have, I think, CEC 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 players. 14 of Notre Dame's 20 commits are in the ESPN 300. And honestly, all but 3 of them are in the top 200. Because you have Micah Bell 128, Christian Gray 149, Adon Schuler 169, which is much more reasonable and where I think he should be. Bubakar's 211, Devin Houston is 182. Rico Flores is 250, 217, and Jane Lamar is 256. And then Jeremiah Love is ranked 90th on ESPN.
What's funny? Someone just put it in the chat too, and I saw this the other day, and I completely forgot about it. Do you know Jaden Greathouse is rated as a tight end by ESPN?
No, he's not. Are you serious?
Yes, he is. Saw it the other day. Someone just put it in the chat, which reminded me. Yep, he's rated as it's like they do the thing where they rate him as 2 different styles of tight ends, and he's like I think he's rated as a flex tight end. Or something.
Oh my gosh, that's so ridiculous. ESPN also has Jaden Ausberry ranked 32nd, so they have him ranked pretty high. So anyway, so that's the rankings updates for the different services and Rivals too. They're up until Joe Otting committed. Mm-hmm. Every player for Notre Dame in the class was a 4-star recruit. And based on their last ranking, that's CC 3, 6, 7, 10, 13. According to Rivals' last rankings update, 15 of their Notre Dame's 20 commits are ranked in the top 250. That does not include Jaden Lamar. That does not include Elijah Page. That does not include Devin Houston, and that does not include Adon Schuler, because they actually have Preston Zinter in the top 250.
Wow!
And they have Sam Pendleton in the top 250,
and not Elijah Page. Talking about criminally underrated, it's Elijah Page. We were talking about that earlier on the phone too. It's like what I mean. I understand that he's added some weight this offseason. You need to see that weight on the frame and how he plays with it, all that good stuff. But we're talking about a kid that's 6'6" plus, with long arms, plays at Pinnacle, has good feet, good film. Like, what am I missing here with Elijah Page that he's that criminally underrated? It's just very strange.
And honestly, I can live with him being in the 200s because of his. And we've talked about this. His junior film is good, but there's definitely some areas like he's got to get stronger. He's got to fill out, and part of the reason he got a bump from us is because he has filled out. Now he's not gotten the full bump because we have him as a 5-star upside guy, but neither of us have him in the top 100 right now. I don't think. I've got him as a 150 player.
Yep.
And I'd probably put him in like a 140 to 160 range is kind of where his grade falls for me right now. Because like every kid has a grade and there's a range of where that grade is. And he's on the lower end of the 150 range, right? But the tools are there, and so we'll see how he kind of feels out. And if somebody wants to have him like 247 has him at number 230, was it 237? I'm okay with that. Like I'd probably have him a little higher, but whatever. But to have a guy that's like like Micah Bell, that's not you have a difference of opinion. That's just you haven't done your job. And I wouldn't be shocked if they haven't even seen that kid play really yet, or they only saw like sophomore or freshman film and haven't. I mean, because. Yeah, from what I understand, there's a very small number of people that are involved in the rankings at On3. If one person said it's only one guy, somebody else told me it's just a few.
Interesting. Yeah. I would say they probably watched Micah Bell's running back highlights and were like, I don't know what to do with this kid. Can he play corner?
Right.
Like it's one of those deals too. Like I wouldn't put that past anybody.
Yeah, it's not good. That's what I do know. And Jaiden Ausberry dropping 100 spots is like, how does one guy rank 32nd by one outlet and 219th by another? It's just
you said it to start this show why that Jaiden Ausberry stuff might be happening.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. So Ryan, those are the rankings updates. And again, a lot of good stuff in there for Notre Dame. I mean, look, we mock and we joke, but why this stuff matters is because these things still have an impact on perception. That's the reality, right? And so when you're trying to put a recruiting class together, most coaches don't care where a kid is ranked, but they understand that it matters to other kids. True story. I was told by some people that are close to Ohio State that Ohio State didn't think very highly of Tate Martell as a player, but they already had quarterbacks before and they knew they were going to get a guy after him, but he was a 5-star kid who was very influential and very well liked by other commits. So they recruited Tate Martell because they thought it would have an impact on them getting other kids, even though they didn't think the kid could play, right? Because he was a 5-star, which, is kind of laughable and is proven to be laughable. Yep. So that right there, because quarterback wasn't they didn't need a big time quarterback in that class. They went out and got a guy that was ranked really high because they thought it would help them get other players, and it did. And, so coaches understand that other kids look at this stuff and the recruits think it matters. I don't think it matters. I think it's, I don't think it's really does a whole lot. And I think it's getting worse. It used to be where I at least respected some of it because I thought there was football people involved in the process. Now there's not a lot of football people involved in this. So that's kind of where I've lost a lot of my, respect for just the entire process. But like you said, there's some good in there for Notre Dame. The perception is good for Notre Dame. Somebody asked about Ronan Hannafin. Ronan Hannafin is still a 3-star by On3, but he is the number 166 player overall by 247.
That's another one where, like, how can those opinions differ so much? Like, that's a massive difference.
Right. 3-star versus borderline top 150 guy. Correct. Yeah. And I think Ronan Hannafin should be ranked higher than 166, but I'm not going to argue with that. We're in the same ballpark. That's the thing is, like, we're in the same ballpark. But when you have a kid ranked in the 200s or not even in the top 250 that I think is a borderline top 100 kid, we're not in the same ballpark. And when you start talking about how a kid being like Micah Bell, where he's ranked by On3, we're not even the same galaxy at this point in time with how you evaluate him. Because I would argue I'd have him ranked higher nationally than you have him ranked in his own state. That's just we're not even speaking the same language. Here's another thing too, why this matters. Because you know what else is perception-wise is strong is there's a very, very strong perception into regards where the recruiting rankings are, more with fans, but also with other recruits. The rankings that came out today, I think, help Notre Dame's chase to be number one because you have some guys that have gone up in the Charles Jagasaw is going to see a huge jump in the rankings. I believe he is now considered let me just look real quick because I don't want to speak out of turn if I'm incorrect here, but I believe that Charles Jagasaw is now a 5-star on the composite list. No, they still have him at number 48. He's now a top 48. He's the top number 48 overall player. He's getting closer to that 5-star status. Peyton Bowen is getting closer to that 5-star status. You know what though? I actually want to look at this, Ryan, because the way that 247 does their composite, their own rankings get more more. They count their own ranking more than others, which is why they call it a composite, where On3 actually has a consensus. And they always brag about like we, weigh all three of them equally and all that kind of stuff. So let me see here real quick. So Jagasol is 38. That looks like there. So he's creeping up. So he's gone up on the composite. Other guys are going up in the composite as they rate. I mean, Joe Otting's going to see a big jump in points because he's now went up into the top 250. Sylvan Apsher's gone up in both rankings, so his points are going to be higher. And then when you see a guy like Austin Novosad have a big jump in points, Ronan Hannafin has had big jump in points. Jeremiah Love when Notre Dame started recruiting him in March, he was a consensus 3-star recruit. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at Jeremiah Love, he's ranked number 107 by On3. He's ranked number 90 by ESPN. He's ranked number 49 by Rival, and he's ranked number 87 by 247 Sports. So that's also how Notre Dame can end up with a higher ranked class, is that guys jump up. Now there's, other schools are going to see that as well. Like On3 had the corner from Texas with the two last, like the hyphen last name.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Calvin Simpson Hunt, right? And that what is,
yep.
They jumped him in the top 250, which I think, how can you have him in the top 250 in the nation and you have Micah Bell 67th in the entire country? That's, in the entire state, But so I think those things matter too, because Notre Dame's going to see a jump in the rankings because of this. Sure. And so if you look at the rankings, a lot of people said Ohio State has jumped Notre Dame. That's not actually true for all the rankings. Notre Dame is still number one on the 247 on the On3 composite or consensus team rankings. And Notre Dame is still number one on 247's rankings. Now, Ohio State's number one on the composite rankings, but Notre Dame is number one on the 247 team rankings. Notre Dame is also number one with ESPN as well. And here's the best part. Notre Dame and Rivals are tied for number one with Rivals. They literally have the same amount of points, which you don't see that often. Right. And I'm looking at it today. They both have 2,697 points. So they're tied for number one. Here's the best part. The number 3 team, Texas, is over 500 points behind Notre Dame.
It's crazy.
And Ohio State. So, I mean, it really is Notre Dame and Ohio State. And Matt says they got a commitment yesterday. These are all updated rankings right now, even with Ohio State getting their commitment yesterday, who was a 4-star kid. So that just shows you how much further ahead Notre Dame and Ohio State are than everybody else. I mean, that's the wild thing. Like a buddy of mine was trying to tell me Georgia's just fine because, they have 14 commits. They're ranked 10th. They've had a lot of misses. They lost Justice Haynes, whose dad played at Georgia.
Did you see that he came out and he said that Ohio State was his number 2, right?
Third.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
They were third. Man. But so when I looked at Rivals rankings, they're almost 1,000 points behind Notre Dame. So what I did was I gave them the number 1, 2, and 3 players in the country. And if you do that, they're still a couple hundred points behind Notre Dame and Ohio State. If they today got the commitments from, I don't even know who they are for Rivals, but the number 1, 2, and 3 player, they'd still be a couple hundred points behind Notre Dame in Ohio State and be at 17 commits, which is a lot. They're not being crystal balled for those guys, right? I mean, it looks right now that they're not going to get Caleb Downs. That's an in-state kid. So the staff turnover that Georgia has had has really hurt them, and they are struggling. But you look at Notre Dame and Ohio State; they are so much further out ahead of everyone else, and they're ahead of everyone else in every points. Average points. Ohio State is 4.05 is their average because they have 2 5-stars to Notre Dame's 1. Notre Dame is at 4. The only other team at 4 is Auburn, and they have 4 commitments. They only have 4 kids in the class. And then after that, the next closest is Clemson at 3.88, and then USC at 3.82, Texas at 3.78. Those are big differences. I mean, those are big differences.
Auburn only has 4 commitments in the class.
Only 4 commitments,
That's a
that's not good.
Tough place
Texas
to be.
A&M only has 5. So it's
the checks didn't clear yet.
No. I mean, I don't know if they've landed a kid since that whole Saban Jimbo spat happened.
Was not a great look.
Kid. No,
it's not a great look.
Yeah.
Nope.
So those are the latest rankings updates. So again, I think they help Notre Dame from a perception standpoint by and large. I mean, we can argue about Drake Bowen and all this kind of stuff and how absurd that is, but other guys are getting bumps as well, which balances it out. And Drake is still ranked, unlike Brennan Vernon, which is absolutely insane to me, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at. That's where we're at with the rankings. And so yeah, there you go. You have the latest. It is funny how they're because they're both started by the same guy. Shannon Terry started 247, built it up, sold it for a bunch of money, and then he got some new investors, and now he's building up on 3. And there's a lot of similarities to what they're doing at 247. And now they're like kind of competing against each other, and they're doing rankings releases the same day. It's kind of
where was Shannon Terry before 247? Didn't he build something else?
He started Rivals
first.
Yeah, he didn't do it. I think he wasn't as much of the guy. I think there's other people involved with Rivals. I think
just part of leadership.
But he was. I mean, he was probably at the top of that leadership
group.
But that's what he does. He builds these things up, makes them profitable. Gets investors to build them up, sells them for a ton of money. He makes a lot of money, and then he goes and does it again. So smart business. Smart business. There's people want it. Yeah, I have no disrespect. I don't particularly like him, but I don't. It's not because of what he's doing with these different services. I mean, I think the things they're doing at 2-4 on 3 are like aesthetically. I like what they're doing. There's some things they're doing that I like.
There's a lot good with it. I don't like the whole NIL valuation and all that type of stuff, but like there is a lot. I mean, like I like the consensus rankings. I think that's
as
cool.
Opposed to I like it better than the composite. Yes,
sure. Yeah. I like it. I think it's a cool element. I think there's a lot of validity to it. I think that the site looks nice. It's aesthetically pleasing.
They're not afraid to put the other outlets on their site. So if you go to the composite rank, they show like 247 just gives the composite ranking. They don't show you mention the other services. If you go to On3's player page, you go to the industry comparison. They put On 3, 247, ESPN, and Rivals all right there, and they show the rankings, which I respect.
It's very friendly to like just like a fan that wants information on recruits. Like it is very friendly because they even have like the scouting tab, they have the recruiting tab, they have the NIL tab if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Whatever.
They show all the visits where a kid has gone.
The offers, like they show everything.
Yeah. And they have a little, analysis of it. Now, the thing that stinks is I think their rankings are really jacked up for the most part. And I still don't have a clue how they've come to a ranking for the team rankings. Still don't make sense to me. Like there was a time when Notre Dame had like 12 commits and Alabama had like 3 and USC had like 3 and they were ranked higher than Notre Dame. And it still doesn't make any sense to me. They try to get too cute with some of that stuff, but overall, as far as just getting information on prospects, I go there as opposed to anywhere else.
Yeah.
If I just want to see kids ranking, right? And so that's definitely so, and that's what he's trying to do, and that's to me that's a smart business plan. It's just there's a lot of other stuff that is going on at On3 that I kind of find distasteful and disgusting, and the NIL thing is one of those. So and a school that we have not mentioned in any of this is Michigan, who is currently ranked 24th on the rankings on On3 consensus rankings, and I'm trying to find their ranking.
That's actually higher than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, they are 36th on Rivals. So it's a tough time for the old Wolverines right now on the recruiting trail. They are currently behind, and they have 12 commits. They are currently behind Wake Forest, Arizona, Pitt, TCU, Boston College, North Carolina, Iowa State, Nebraska, Minnesota, Purdue, Michigan State. Michigan State also has a higher per player average. They are behind Duke. Mike Elko putting together a nice, it's volume. They got 25 commits already. But Washington is doing better than them right now. Louisville has a higher ranking and a per player average. They're behind West Virginia, Iowa, Northwestern. That's about volume. And of course, Texas Tech. Cincinnati's putting together a nice little class. They're 13th.
You mentioned one that I saw a little bit of the other day. I was just kind of like, just browsing through some stuff. Arizona's actually not doing a bad job on the recruiting trail, man.
Dude, I'm going to tell you something right now. And if you look at some of the kids they got in last year's class, they got some dudes. Yeah. That kid, that McMillan kid they got, the receiver from California, that kid is a baller. And they got about
Jalen?
No. But he's and they got about 5 or 6 kids. I'm like, those kids can play. And they did that after a 1-11 season. Like if he can just go 6-6 and take them to a bowl game this year, which for Arizona is not going to be easy because Judd Fish inherited a rough roster. But if he can
rough.
somehow just get them 5-7, 6-6, something like that, he's gonna start knocking some kids down, because he's doing a really nice job out there of getting quality players. And as you mentioned, I mean, they're sitting here now at 34. A team that went 1-11 last year should not be sitting at number 34 in the rankings.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
And they also they're also competing obviously in state against Arizona State, which is not a great place right now, right? Like that's not a good situation to be in. So
Yeah.
Arizona's doing all right, man. Like you said, it's been struggles, but on the recruiting trail, I think there's some positive. I mean, I kind of like the quarterback they have in this. What's his name? Brady Doman, right?
The kid from Colorado. Yeah.
He's not a
Notre
bad
Dame
little
looked at him. They had him on campus. He did a workout, and he was one of those kids where if he works out, well, this is last summer, if he works out well, they were thinking about offering him. They liked him. They liked him. It's just that was kind of when it started to really get hot and heavy with Dante Moore, and so they went in another direction. I like the kids they're going after now better. I think they made the right decision. But like you said, big armed kid, good size, and again, if you can have a 4-star kid to build your class around it, the thing holding them back right now is just they went 1-11 last year. He's got to prove he can win some games. So he's doing a really nice job. And that's true there's a few teams like that. Like if this new coach can win some games, like if Mike Elko can win some games, he'll recruit some kids to Duke. With that academic background, Jeff Brom won some games this year. Look at the class he's putting together. Yeah. Kalen DeBoer is the interesting one at Washington, because they're getting their butt kicked right now in state. If you look at their class, they're a top 20 class nationally, but they only have, I think, 2 4-star kids in the entire class, and neither of them are from their own state. They've lost just about every big in-state kid that they've wanted. They've lost since he got hired. And again, he inherited a dumpster fire, but he's going to need to win some games this year to get them rocking and rolling. So anyway, that's where we're at the rankings, Ryan. So I think we can move on to a little bit of Jaiden Ausberry discussion and Jaiden Ausberry some film.
Yep. So we're going to pull up some Jaiden Ausberry film, because we realized last night when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today on the show that we've never watched Jaiden Ausberry together as a duo. So we're going to get into that film. Also going to do a mailbag at the end. We're going to be starring questions throughout. So if there's any questions that pop up, you can pop them in now, but if not, you can hold them until the end. So we're obviously talking about, I mean, Brian, he's you're a fan favorite of his, right? I mean, he's a fantastic football player out of the state of Louisiana, out of University Lab, which is right on LSU's campus. Really talented football player. And I guess maybe a good way to start is where things kind of stand with Jaiden Ausberry, I guess would be a good spot maybe to start out with. So I'll kick it over to you, Brian. I'll just say, I think that as long as this one ends sometime in the near future, I feel really good about where Notre Dame stands currently.
So Notre Dame has really done a great job with this recruitment. We've been talking about it for a while. We have gone from there's no way they're getting a kid from Baton Rouge University High School. Wait a minute, hold on. His dad played linebacker at LSU? Oh yeah, it's not happening. Wait, hold on. Wait a minute. His dad still works at LSU? No chance. Nope, not happening. And they've really done a great job. And you follow, we always say follow kids' feet, right? And they made multiple visits to Notre Dame. His brother visited last year, Austin. Notre Dame thought about making a run at Austin, decided not to. Honestly, I would have. I liked him better as a player than Jaden Bellamy, for example. I would have made a run at Austin Ausberry. And I would try to find a legal way to let the family know that if he jumps in the portal over the next year, we'd be interested, as long as he takes, certain classes. I would be interested in that. He's a good football player. You just kind of see the more he visits, he comes for a camp, they come back for a game, then they come for an unofficial this spring, and then then he comes back for an official this summer, and Notre Dame has just slowly kind of climbed up the list. Other schools involved, LSU's involved, Auburn's involved, obviously Texas A&M, Michigan. And Notre Dame has just really done a great job there. And I think his last 2 visits, and Ryan, I'm trying to remember, I got to go back. I got to go back to his list here real quick and see where he is. I forget when his second visit. Did he come for the spring game? I think he came for the spring game, correct?
I believe so. I'll double check, but I believe so.
I'm looking at it now. So it was in March 18th. He was going to try to come back for the spring game, ended up not coming back, came back in July. He was here for March 18th. They were sort of in that top group when he was kind of going through it. And then when that March 18th visit is when Notre Dame really pulled ahead. And that was his first chance to meet Al Golden. That has helped. And one thing that's helped his recruitment is Al Washington was already recruiting him when he was at Ohio State. He liked Jaiden Ausberry a lot and was recruiting him at Ohio State. Then Marcus Freeman was recruiting Jaiden Ausberry for the last year at Notre Dame. Well, then Al Washington comes to Notre Dame, and so now you've got two guys that he has a great relationship with. And then Al Golden comes in, and he's got the NFL background and all that. And I think that's the thing that put Notre Dame over the top. And coming out of the visit to in June, Ryan, Notre Dame's been in pole position. We have said for a long time that Notre Dame is his clear leader. And despite him saying he was going to take it into the fall, we have felt that there's a chance that he is going to commit this summer.
Yeah.
Well, now you're seeing everybody else kind of catching up to that. And that's kind of where there's a flurry of Jaiden Ausberry news, is everybody else is kind of reporting what we've been saying for the last month. And I'm not saying that to be snippy or flippant. I'm just, reminding people as we talk about Jaiden Ausberry that we do feel there was always a chance to get him to commit. To your point, Ryan, if he chooses not to commit this summer, then it gets a little bit hairy. All the intel we have had is that we do think at some point in time he's going to kind of do what Jaden Greathouse did, which is I just woke up every morning and it kept being the same thing. And eventually you just kind of say, you know what, this is where I want to be. And it's about changing your original. The original plan was wait. Jaden Greathouse's original plan was wait. Tobias Merriweather had a similar thing last summer where he was going to commit in December, but it was so obvious where he was going to go. Why string it along? I do anticipate something. I do think there's a good chance something like that could happen with Jaiden Ausberry. Is it pending and meaning over the next week? You guys should be hitting refresh all the time. No, I don't think it's going to be like that. I think it'd be something as we get kind of closer to fall camp and things like that is when I think maybe something like that could happen. But Notre Dame is in great position. And the funny thing is, I have a friend of mine who literally sends me he'll just send me screenshots of everything reported about Notre Dame targets. And it's always funny when he sends me the ones on Jaiden Ausberry, because no matter who it's from, they always say Notre Dame's the leader, but we think our school's second. Notre Dame's the leader. And so everybody thinks they're number two, but they all admit the same thing, that Notre Dame's the leader. And so he's a kid that I thought, as we've kind of spent a lot of time on the committed players and things like that, we want to look at some of these uncommitted kids. So, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk today about Jaden. We're going to have another recruiting show probably Wednesday. Since Vince is on vacation, we're going to do an extra recruiting show this week. And we'll talk Ronan Hannafin on Wednesday. And then probably next Monday, we'll break down Jeremiah Love's film and just look at some of these uncommitted kids, dive into their film. And then after that, we'll then start moving on to 2024 players.
Yeah.
But we did want to make sure we didn't move on too quickly.
Wait, did you say Vince is on vacation? I thought I was the only one that took vacations around here.
You're on vacation this week, and then Sean Stiers is going on vacation next week. You know who's not going on vacation? This guy. Not by choice. Not by choice. I wish I could go on a vacation. I don't think I've gone on a real my vacations are going to Virginia to visit family and then working and doing shows the whole time that I'm there. But at least I'm in a different place working. So that's the equivalent of a Brian vacation. But I'm hoping that the guys that I've hired to do such a great job. I feel comfortable going on a vacation. I'm getting closer, very closer.
That's fair.
So that's kind of where we're at with Jaden, Ryan. And if he's got a very interesting recruiting profile, which we were kind of talking about earlier. I want to show that because he's a guy with some very interesting rankings. He is ranked 32nd by ESPN. He's ranked 80th by Rivals. Both have him as the number 4 linebacker in the country, which I think I'd have him somewhere in between those two. I wouldn't quite have him at 32 just because of his size. I would have him probably a little higher than 80. He'd be in between there for me. And then 247 dropped him to let's see here. They dropped him to 198. And he was previously in the top 100. He was originally the last rankings update, he was 94th. They dropped him to 198, and then On3 dropped him from 171 to 219. So at least they had him lower anyway.
Sure.
But he's now 219 for them. He is now 19th at linebacker from On3 and 17th at linebacker from 247. So quite a big rankings variation there for old Jaiden Ausberry.
So there's 16 linebackers in the country better than Jaiden Ausberry. That's it's an interesting take, man. It's an interesting take.
I mean, he's 4th on the others. I could name 4 that I could make a case for being higher than him.
Sure. Sure.
Definitely. I mean, like Anthony Hill, Darian Gillette. I mean, there's some guys you look and say, okay, I get that one. But he's without question to me a top 10 linebacker for sure. And I'd probably
100%.
rank him kind of in the middle. So that's kind of where we have him ranked, Ryan, at this point in time. Really talented player, a guy that's been a must get for Notre Dame. And let's try and talk a little bit about that first two right before we dive into the film of why is Notre Dame recruiting Jaiden Ausberry? Like we have him ranked as a top 50 player, or IB does. Me, I don't know where Ryan's grade is on him at this point in time. I know you like him, but I don't know if you have him quite that high. Where would you kind of?
I would have him as a top 75 kid.
Yeah. So we're in the same ballpark. I'm like 40 to 60. You're 75. That's the same ballpark.
Sure.
So the reason they're recruiting him is because I do think with Josh Burnham moving to defensive end, I think there is a need for another linebacker in this class, especially one with a little bit of flexibility. And I see Jaden as a rover will type of player. Rover now, I could see him eventually being a will just as he fills out and gets stronger and those type of things. But I also think he's a kid that runs well enough and covers well enough that he could be definitely stay at rover. And I think that's where they see him where, Drake Bowen could be a rover, but we both agree he's a will that could maybe potentially be an athletic Mike. Yes. Preston Zinter's a Mike who could maybe play some will. I think there is a need for a guy that can come in and add depth to that rover spot. Because Jalen Sneed's there now. Nolan Ziegler could play there now, but Nolan's already inside, and Jalen could eventually move inside too, perhaps, or he could stay there. So there's a lot of different options there, but they want a guy that can run and cover. That's what they're looking for. And, as we'll see on film, the one thing about Jaiden Ausberry is he can flat out run and he can cover. And I read an On3 article yesterday that a buddy sent me where they have him. He was the best linebacker at the Future 50 in coverage, and they raved about how well he covers. So it sounds like he had a really good weekend this past weekend as well.
Yeah, no, for me, it makes total sense as far as the fit into the class. Like you said, Preston Zinter is that true Mike, and that's he's not going to stray too far out of there. I could even see Preston Zinter maybe eventually growing into a Viper, depending on what his body can hold. Like, I think that's very possible. But then you're talking about Drake Bowen, who, again, maybe could get some run at rover, but more than likely he's a will long-term. So there is no true rover in the class. And I think Jaiden Ausberry, at least short-term, could fill that role. No doubt about it. I do agree, though. I think long-term he's a will. I think he's going to be best served inside because I think his instincts and his explosiveness inside, I think he's just, honestly, I think he's just too instinctual to keep out of the box. Like, I think that he just reads blocks so well and he just flows to the football so well. And we'll see that obviously on film, but I think if we could say, well, not one thing, but one thing that we could definitely say definitively is when Marcus Freeman came on board, Brian, he was like, I need to get more athletic on the second level.
Right.
This team needs to get more athletic on the second level. And you have now, in a 2-year span, gotten guys like Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and potentially Jaiden Ausberry. We'll see how that obviously turns out if they're able to close, and Drake Bowen. So they are getting some really athletic dudes on the second level, like guys that could potentially play a little rover, could play a little will, like they could play all over.
And different types of athletes.
Yes.
That's the thing too. Like one of the questions that we got from John A1 was, how does Ausberry compare to Jalen Sneed athletically? Very different. Jalen is an explosive vertical guy. Jalen Sneed is. Jaiden Ausberry is more of a smooth. He can be explosive, but he's smooth. He's got great hips. I think Nolan Ziegler is a lot like Jalen Sneed, both very explosive guys. Josh Burnham was more of a smooth and fluid and rangy guy. I think Junior Tuihalamaka is more that way too. Fluid, looser hips, and you'd think a bigger guy to have, instinctual and all those type of things. So it's a different type of athlete as well. Drake Bowen is an explosive guy that can also flip his hips and run. Drake's a little bit unique. He's a different kind of cat.
I think that you highlighted it, right? Because, I mean, honestly, I think he could be a rover. I think he could be a will, and he could eventually, like you said, be a speedy Mike. Like, he could play all three eventually.
And I honestly don't. I think the only other guy that I could say could maybe do all three would be Nolan Ziegler, just because he's got but he's not as thick as Drake was at the same age. Nolan's got to fill out a lot to get to that point, but I think he's eventually could get there. But he's more of a rover will right now. And that's what makes Drake unique. And that's why Jaiden Ausberry would be such a good fit if Notre Dame can close this thing out and get him, is he would fit in really well with the group that they have now and with the class that he would be jumping in on, because there is that positional flexibility where, as you can see, Marcus Freeman and now Al Golden, they're not recruiting guys that are just, you're a Mike, you're a Will. With the exception of Junior, they can all legitimately grade out as Notre Dame caliber starters at 2 spots. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Every kid that they've gotten can grade out as a starting
would you grade Preston Zinter as a Viper in that regard then, or are you saying that
Mike or Will?
Mike or Will.
Yeah, Mike or Will. I mean,
That's
if
fair.
JD Bertrand can play Will, Preston Zinter can play Will. Is the way I look at it, right?
100%.
Now, again, varying levels of Notre Dame caliber starter, right? There's the Drew White kind, and then there's the, Jeremiah Usu-Koromoan and everything in between. So they're not all the same guy, but they all grade out as starting caliber players at 2 spots. Mike Will, except for Junior. He's the only one that I would say wouldn't.
Sure.
He's a Mike. I mean, he's a Mike. Josh Burnham was a Mike Will Viper. He was 3. Jalen Snead is a Mike Will. And Drake Bowen and Josh Burnham are the 2 that I felt most comfortable grading out as 3 spots. But Drake's the only one who's 3 spots are linebacker. There was always a chance, and I hoped it wouldn't have happened so quickly, but there was always a chance that Josh Burnham was going to outgrow Mike linebacker because he's so long.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, outgrow linebacker, not just Mike linebacker. And, of course, that's kind of how it played out.
Yep.
So we'll see. We'll have to see on that one. So anyway, Ryan, that's kind of a look at Jaden and the fit and why Notre Dame is on him and a little bit of the backstory and the recruiting ranking. So now let's jump into some film, and we're going to do this a couple different ways, because the way that his film is kind of broken down, he's got some sophomore film that I want to see because I want to track his kind of this 2 years, and then his junior year film is not, like on Huddle at least anyway, is not it's not like one highlight. It's actually several, right? So we're gonna have to kind of break that up in that regard as well. So it's just going to be a little bit different. So we'll have kind of be coming in and out with like 1 minute highlights on a few of these, but we can go ahead and get started here with some film of Jaiden Ausberry from this is his sophomore season. And we're going to let you guys see him. You don't need to see us anymore. He's number 20. So you'll see the film, very instinctive guy. Somebody made a comment in the chat, and I think there's some merit to it. He does play high. Yes. Especially for a shorter guy. I do want to see him learn to play high. That's correctable. I think the difference is I would not say I don't want him inside because of that. I would just say it's something he needs to work on. And you'll see, too, from the film, he is now, here's something else that was interesting. Love the range there, Ryan. Let's get back to that. That's very rangy. So I don't know how accurate this is. And I'm going to have to do some asking around on this because I know he measured, usually these kids, when they come for official visits, they measure in. But On3 reported that at the Future 50 this weekend, he measured in at 6'2", 215. If he's 6'2", 215, that means he hit a growth spurt.
For sure. Yeah. I would have guessed he would be closer to 6 foot than 6'2", to be honest with you.
Right. And on film, that's what he looks like. And I've always kind of the 6'1", 205 is kind of where you saw him. You see the really nimble feet, the really easy change of direction, goes low. And that's the thing is he plays high because his technique is there. He can go low with ease. Look how he dips down and just explodes to this ball carrier right here. That's a kid that knows how to go low. He just has to. The big thing is he's going to have to get a lot stronger, which is another reason I think Rover is the spot where he's going to start off. You see him coming off. Look at that instinct. Look at the explosiveness. He kind of finds that hole and just explodes through it. This kid can really run and close.
Closing speed right there too.
Oh, yeah. Finish off the play. Right, he's got to finish off the play better because against a Power 5 quarterback, this is probably not a sack.
He probably shrugs you off.
Yeah. You got to close on that. But the disruption is the key. But he's very nimble. He's just undersized. Again, this is sophomore film for those watching, but he's very instinctive, Ryan. And that's the thing. You use the word eyes. I use the word just kind of instinct, decision making. I mean, whatever you want to use it. The fact is, this kid is very decisive. He makes quick reads. He can diagnose incredibly well, in my opinion, and he gets to the ball in a hurry. I mean, in a hurry. He is around the football a lot.
Well, I'm very critical of linebacker play because that's the one that I played. So there's things that I look for clearly in linebacker play, and Jaden has all those things. I mean, you talk about range a little bit, but So your first step when you're a linebacker is your trigger step, and he has a really nice trigger to kind of find the action. And the one thing I love, Brian, is when he sees something, he's going, man. Like he
Right.
is shot out of a cannon. There's not bad, like guys with bad eyes will kind of stick in their trigger and then it'll take them a second to kind of diagnose and then explode. He's like an instantaneous player. Like he sees it, he trusts it, he flows to it.
Well, this play right here, I think, is an example. This is sophomore film. I would say he is a half a second late reacting to this, but he sees it, right? And what's going on here is the backfield action is trying to take him one direction, right? And certain keys are taking him one direction, but if you see these other pulling linemen, he's like, okay, they're trying to make me go this way, but he reads it, he sees it, and I'd say once he sees it, he's then like just a split second late getting out there, but then that speed that it just closing the football gets there, and he's really able to take off and get to the football and really in a hurry. And again, reminded this is sophomore film. We'll pull up some of his junior film here in a second. Really easy cover guy.
And he has, because people will look at the size a little bit and they'll say, but does he have power and physicality? And the answer is yes, because he creates so much explosiveness in such short spaces that he just creates so much momentum, man. And you'll see him, he delivers a lot of big shots in the open field. Like that one, for instance.
Especially as a junior.
Yep.
And there's not a ton of great film. There's a couple good films on YouTube where you can watch the whole game. We don't do that's just a hard thing to do in this kind of format. Highlights are better for this kind of format. Yep. But if you watch some of the game stuff, I mean, he can strike. And again, he's still undersized. He's going to have to fill out and get bigger and like be more violent with his hands. That's the one thing I will say I'd say the area he needs to improve the most. He's got really fast hands. In the film I've seen, he's got to get more violent with him. Like, he tries to kind of use his speed and athleticism and instincts and all that. He's going to have to get a little bit more violent with his hands when it comes to block destruction.
I agree with that. I think block destruction just in general, because I think one thing, Brian, is I would say that I think his length is a little average, maybe even slightly below average. So he's a guy that, to gain that extension, you're going to have a physical style as far as your ability to take on blocks and then to be able to shed blocks too, right? Yeah. So I think that's a big thing.
I do like his arm length. I don't think he's really broad, and he's obviously not tall, but I do like his arm length, especially when we get to his junior film. You'll see it's taken up a notch a little bit, but he can run. But the point is, even if I'm right on the length, Ryan, he's still 6'1".
Yep.
He's still good. I mean, when he fills out, he's going to be 225.
Oh,
he's always going to be an undersized guy if he moves inside. The point is the leverage and then being more violent with his hands is going to be a very, very important thing. Yeah. Because you're not going to have him just taking on, second level guards. You're always going to want him to get off those blocks. It's not like a 3-4 defense where your job is to crash the guard. You're going to want him getting off. That's how Marcus Freeman's defense is. I would imagine how Al Golden's is. You have a responsibility, but your responsibility is get to the ball, not eat up blockers. And that's what you're going to see from him.
Oh, I love a special teams highlight blocking too. It's big time.
His brother Austin, I think, played a lot of corner for them. He's a good player. He was more of a safety.
I love number 20 for a linebacker. I don't know why. Just looks fantastic to me.
Is that what you wore?
No, that was what Pete Werner wore, though.
Gotcha. There you go. I know you're very high on Pete Werner, understandably so.
I love Pete, man.
See, like that's good block destruction technique, but it's not real violent. Like the shed is
passive.
I'd say the shed is good. The stack isn't, right? And that's where he's going to have to get better at.
Someone asked Brian. I mean, so he's playing at University Lab, and someone asked about the competition level. They play good teams in Louisiana, do they not?
I believe so, but I don't know enough about Louisiana recruiting to know an answer. But yeah, they usually play pretty good competition.
Yeah.
I love how that's always like the first question people ask, and it's like one of the things I least care about.
True.
For this type of evaluation, there's other aspects where I care, but not for that particular one. So that's sophomore film, Ryan, and again, you see a kid that can run, you see a kid that's instinctive, you see a kid that is willing to hit, and a kid that flies to the football, and the athleticism thing really, really stands out to me. I'm going to pull up his next game film here. This is not game film, it's game cut ups, because His junior year stuff was, as I said, there was no like one highlight tape that they put together. It was all just like
Games.
individual games. So we'll
Yeah.
pull some of that and show that here. Same. There was part of the year, if I remember correctly, he had a cast on his hand as well.
So like this is a fast trigger right here. Got
Right.
downhill quick, avoided the block.
He is right here. For those who, because first time I watched it, I had a hard time with that too. He's right here. You see the instincts. Sift through the trash, man. Sift through the trash.
Which is it's a underrated skill, man. It is not an easy thing to always sort through traffic.
Yeah. So this is an interesting play. Again, he's backside here. This may not be what he's trying to show, but look at when he comes up. Look how quickly, Ryan, he plants and gets vertical. Look how loose that is. Or he plants and gets backwards and drops into coverage. That's a very kind of twitchy type of movement there, in my opinion.
Yep. That's to your conversation about being a fluid, smooth kid. Like that's it right there.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like their uniforms too, by the way.
Yep. Stays line his feet. That's a, see, I like this. This is that when you hear us talk about lateral quickness, this is an example, right, Ryan?
Yep.
His ability to kind of work laterally, plant your feet, work, move, explode, but that change of direction. Yeah, there you go. There you go. And that's what we're looking for. And that's what I kind of like want to start doing more of in these shows, Ryan, is kind of pointing out terms that we'll use a lot when we see examples of it so people can visualize it. This is a nice downhill blitz. Nice little run stunt here.
Blitz. Yep. Run blitz.
Yep. It's got to go lower. He doesn't explode. I think this kind of got on him a little quicker than he expected because he normally does a pretty good job of dipping and ripping through contact, but I think this just got on him pretty quick.
I don't think his angle is great here either. It looks like he kind of hits his upfield shoulder. You kind of want him working a little more inside out on that back hip.
Which can happen when you're run stunting, because a run stunt's different. You're not reading per se. You have a job. You are attacking B gap. And so, but yeah, he's going to have to kind of see that and just get a little bit lower, arrive with a little bit more force. All right, so that's that game. Get to the next one. Again, this is junior film from Jaiden Ausberry, who, as everyone knows, I'm a big fan of Jaiden Ausberry, and a lot of things about him too, Ryan, that make him such a great fit for Notre Dame. It's not just the football stuff. I mean, this is a great student. I mean, like Sean Davis, we were kind of talking about him on Saturday, and the thing I said that I kind of joked with Sean about is like, you never talk about Jaiden Ausberry, the football player, because he only ever wants to talk about Jaiden Ausberry, the leader, the captain, all that other kind of stuff. See, this is like saying, I do kind of like his length. I do think he's got some long
this is junior film, right?
This is junior film, yeah.
He looks a little lengthier here to me than he did.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, wait till we see his junior film, right? Like, it looked like he got a little bit more something to him there.
Yep. Oh, and I will say this also. I know I'm working a lot on the aesthetics right here, but the white long sleeves as a linebacker is always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. That was a Ryan Roberts original.
You can see the foot quickness here. Again, there are times when he needs to get a little bit better at just really using his hips to explode through contact. He does it. He just doesn't always do it. But you see the violence, though. I mean, it's like this back, just like, okay, this back wanted no part of that action. No.
And like you said, he came in, his level was a little high too. He came in high and the running back still had no shot. No shot.
Right.
Ball skills helps when a quarterback throws it right to you, but still,
but he gets in the track. And there's some, like, you don't see him getting in coverage much on film, and that's where you kind of got to rely on some of the 7-on-7 stuff. And there's some decent film that I've seen in the past of him in 7-on-7 or 1-on-1s at different camps where you really see him flip his hips and do different things. And the thing is, like, what do you see on other clips, right? Change the direction, loose hips, nimble feet, and he can run.
Well, even that clip, Ryan, in the beginning, he doesn't even move much, but you can just see the looseness. Like, you can just see how springy he is, with his steps. There's no wasted movement. Like, that's good foot quickness, even though he doesn't move that far.
He never flat foots. He never flat foots. And I like that, because that's a tendency for a lot of guys to still kind of get into that.
Yep. On the
that aspect with it.
Get on their heels.
Exactly.
Yep. Closing speed's fantastic, though. It's fantastic.
Yep. All right, let's get to some more.
Which is so important because I feel like we talk about a lot of guys where they have trouble finishing, right? Like finishing sacks, finishing tackles for loss.
Well, that was a big issue for Notre Dame this year. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually it comes back to like if you're talking about like maybe a Drew White who was a good football player, but like didn't have great arm length, right? Like he didn't have a big tackle radius. So you need to be able to have, whether it is outstanding foot quickness or it's a large tackle radius, you need to have the ability to finish. And one thing that I think that translates easy for Ausberry is he's got some exceptional closing speed on him. Like right there. Another run blitz, or well, it ends up being a pass. But
and he actually has to kind of dip to his right a little bit to get to the hole, like where he's initially his first two steps are not going where he thinks it's going to go. He quickly dips and works into a different angle and then still gets through. That's that instinct. That's another example right here. His initial track is closed, so he quickly cuts in and finds another hole and gets to the quarterback.
And it can be tough sometimes to kind of distinguish what his coverage skills are, because coverage is a lot about feel, right? But I mean, if I'm a high school coach, why am I not blitzing this kid as much as possible?
Right.
You know, like
That's
the name of the game.
Yeah, and you'll see it in some game film, and in game film they don't let him. He doesn't play a lot of man, but what you can see in some of the game film I've seen is he does he really gets good depth in zone coverages. Like he can really open up and run, which shouldn't be surprising, based on what we know of him. But yeah, he that's going to be a part of his game that's going to have to obviously continue improving. All right, there we go. Now I think this is definitely one of the ones where you can definitely see the cast on his hand. Yeah, I believe this is the one. Nope, this isn't. Yeah, it is. Here he is on the edge right there with his hand in a big old cast.
Yep, there he is.
Because he's on the edge. Yeah, he's on the edge in this one.
I feel bad for some of these kids he's playing, man. It's a little disrespectful.
That's a really nice downhill burst right there.
Yep. And like you said, his level's still high, man. Imagine when he's able to kind of play it at like a little more bend at the hips. Like it's going to be really, really good.
Yep. Because it's not a lack of athleticism. His technique's not where it needs to be.
Exactly. Like you see him change direction and you're like, there's no flexibility issues there. It's just, it's literally just a level issue.
Yep. So we'll get one more of Jaiden Ausberry, Ryan, and then we'll kind of wrap that up and dive into our mailbag. So if y'all have some questions, feel free to throw them in here. We'll definitely get to those.
Yep.
And answer those questions.
I've been starring a few as we've been watching. So if you want to keep throwing in questions, please do.
All right, last one from his junior year, and we will pull this up and watch these last few clips, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. But yeah, Marcus Freeman has definitely changed linebacker recruiting at Notre Dame since he's arrived. Here we go. Sorry about that, everybody. There we go.
Yeah, if they develop linebacker properly, it's about to be linebacker year.
This is one of the few coverage clips, Ryan. You're going to see him come downhill and then flip his hips and open and run when this guy turns and goes up. This is a smart job by the back. Okay, the quarterback's running. You know, short guys that are up front, you go deep. Guys that are deep, you come up, right? And that's what the back does. And Jaden sees it. He does a nice job playing. See what he's trying to do here. And that's what I like, Ryan. He's trying to bait this quarterback into throwing this ball.
Yep.
Right. He's going to, because he's running on top of the guy. And when you run on top of the guy, it's because you're going to allow yourself to close downhill if that ball gets thrown and step in front of it. Whereas if you try to come too level initially, that's how the ball gets out in front of you, or the guy turns up and then he outruns you. And he does a really nice job here. Really nice job in coverage there.
No, he's just so smooth, man. He's just so instinctive and smooth, and he's a violent player. I mean, when you have all three of those things, then you're in good shape.
Yep. But yeah, I wish he was a little bit taller.
Sure.
But that's all right, though.
That's even becoming less of an issue at line. I know people always talk about that with quarterbacks, but if you look at some of the linebackers that are getting drafted in the first round now, I mean, you're talking about guys like Devin White, who was 6 foot, Devin Bush, who was 5'11".
Right.
Height is becoming less and less of an issue on the second level as well.
Devin Bush is a really intriguing comparison for me, for Jaiden Ausberry. They're a little different. I think Devin was a little thicker at a younger age. Jaden's a little bit taller. I think Jaden is a little bit more smooth. Devin, I think in high school, is a little touch more just
Straight line,
explosive.
linear. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of things to compare between the two as far as like potential roles. The difference I would say is I think Jaden has more outside in flexibility, where Devin Bush was built like an outside guy, but he was an inside linebacker. I mean, he always was an inside linebacker. So that's Jaiden Ausberry, everybody. So that now I think you guys start to see a little taste of why I'm very high on that kid. So yeah, very, 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 very high on him. A very talented player, and a guy that we feel Notre Dame is in a good position for as where things stand right now. So he would be yet another big pickup for Notre Dame if they get it done. And as we've been saying for the last month, I did a hot board update last Monday where I said, based on what we are hearing, we think that it could happen. And now you're starting to hear other people reporting what we reported a week ago. So it just adds to the momentum that Notre Dame is building in this one.
Can I send a quick shout out to the staff real quick as well? When I talked to Jaden a couple months ago, he told me, because I think this is really the first visit was really where everything started ramping up a little bit. And I remember when he left that visit, he said it was almost word for word. And I put it in an article at that point, or on a post on the message board. He said that the atmosphere and energy around the program was completely different than when he was there last with the previous staff. So
Which was
Notre Dame,
did he come for a game?
I believe so. I believe it was
and then he was also on campus last summer for a visit. So yes. Yeah, you Ryan, you've told me that a lot. You've heard that a lot from kids. They're like, man, this is a different energy.
Yep.
People ask, why are they recruiting so well? It's like, is it just because of it's just because of Marcus Freeman, but it's not like Marcus Freeman's walking in putting voodoo charms on people and they're getting them into class. I mean, it's the whole encompassing change of the program, right, Ryan? Like, this is what Ryan's saying. It's obviously the work ethic is there. And how many times have you guys written about when Ryan, read about any story that Ryan writes on the kid. I talk to Coach Freeman. I talk to Coach whoever the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator is. I talk to the position coach. Sometimes they'll talk to a guy that just happens to be from their region. Like, why is Chancey Stuckey talking to that guy? Oh, they're from the similar hometown or whatever.
Yeah,
this staff does a great job. They work really well together. And Ryan, like you said, Coach Freeman has created an energy, the competition, all those type of things. He's brought in people that are fired up to be there. And I think that embracing Notre Dame is really the biggest thing. And I think that's where a lot of that energy comes from that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think it's contagious to the staff, to people that are covering covering Notre Dame, to people that are just, casual fans, to recruits. I think all over, Marcus Freeman's energy is really contagious. So,
and that's a big part of why Notre Dame has the number one ranked class in 2023 and 2024, because as I said before, they are ranked higher. They are ranked number one on the On3 team rankings. They're ranked number one on the 247 rankings, not composite, but 247, tied for number one on Rivals, and are still number one on ESPN. And of course, they're number one on 2024, but it's early yet. I mean, that's, there's a long way to go on that one. But again, they're off to a great start. They're off to a better start than they were last year. And of course, they're going to continue to grow and grow and grow. So we'll see how that plays out. So Ryan, let's dive into our mailbag. So for the next little bit, however many questions you guys have, if you guys have some good questions, I'm going to kind of go back to the top, Ryan, and see if we can find some more. But if you guys have questions, please throw them in. I know we have some super chats that I'll get started here as well. But if you have some questions you want us to get to from a recruiting standpoint, we will get to those and try to answer as many as we can here for the next hour or so of this. So Ryan, let's go ahead and get started. We did have a couple super chats I want to pull up. We have one from our guy, Truman DeMel. Truman, thank you very, very much for your super chat. He says, what will the Jadens do for Notre Dame? Jaden Lamar, Jaiden Ausberry, Jaden Greathouse, also Tyler Parker. So I'm not sure who that is, but yes, there's a lot of, and then Jalen, there's also some Jalen's, right?
Oh, I know who Tyler Parker was, that 14-year-old that I sent you that
the big old joker.
Yeah, that big
good
kid.
Lord.
Yeah.
I didn't see what his name was, but like, that's insane. Yeah, a lot of Jadens, and they got Jaden Bellamy last year, right? Got Jalen Sneed last year. So, yeah, I mean, so Ryan, I mean, obviously the name is great, but I mean, these are really good football players. And let's assume for a second Notre Dame gets Jaiden Ausberry just for the sake of answering Truman's question. You know, what do those guys do for Notre Dame?
I think it's transformative. I mean, for different reasons, right? I mean, we talked a lot about Greathouse, obviously, when we had him on the show after he committed. I think that he is going to be able to come in day one and help Notre Dame's receiving core, right? Like, and I think he's because what was it, Brian? 4 scholarship receivers, right, after the season that you're guaranteed, right? And it is something where you need the 2023 recruiting class. You need wide receivers to come and be able to help from day one, and I think that's what you're going to get in Jaiden Ausberry. And I mean, sorry, in Jaden Greathouse. Jaden Ausberry, if Notre Dame's able to close on him, he is an impactful player because I believe that long term, he could be the voice of your defense. Like he could be the quarterback of a defense. That's what I see it with his upside because he's just so intelligent and he's infectious. I think,
and that's what Sean always talks about. Whenever he talks about, he doesn't talk about instincts, or I mean, he doesn't talk about speed, or he just talks about that right there. This guy is going to call your defense, and he's going to be a team captain.
100%, 100%. And that's infectious, man. I think that that's the word that I use for the coaching staff. And I think that you're getting players that are also have an infectious personality. So I think that's what he can bring. And then Jaden Lamar, I like Jaden Lamar. I think that Jaden Lamar can be a positive and good all-purpose player in your modern game today, right? Like Notre Dame's going to ask their running backs to not only handle business in the run game, but to also pass block, to also catch the football. And that's what Jaden Lamar brings to me. It's the all-around football game. So I think that all three of those guys are going to be very, very important to Notre Dame's future moving forward here. And yeah, I'm excited about it, Truman. And yes, Tyler Parker was that young man that the video has been surfacing over. He's like a 295-pound 14-year-old. I believe he's at is he at he's out in California somewhere. I forget where he's at, but it is, yeah, he looks pretty good for his age. We'll just leave it at that and we'll see.
Yeah. Truman also had another super chat, Ryan. Thank you again, Truman. Is Ronan Hannafin and Ed McCaffrey Chase Claypool type of guy?
That's an interesting question. I would say, I mean, so like Easy Ed was more back shoulder big guy, right? Like he wasn't a dynamic athlete. Right. Claypool's a dynamic athlete. Wouldn't say if Ronan Hannafin's a really good athlete. I don't know if he's quite Chase Claypool athlete though. Like Chase Claypool's a historically gifted type of athlete for his size, right?
Right.
I would say that Ronan Hannafin for me is a guy where, like, hey, man, he's 6'3", 205 pounds. He's going to be 210, 215 before you know it. And he's a 4'4" type of kid. So he's a dynamic athlete in his own right. I would say he's somewhere in between those two because I think he's definitely a more gifted athlete than Ed McCaffrey was playing for the Denver Broncos. But Chase Claypool, there's not many guys historically that have tested to the degree of Chase Claypool at his size.
Yeah. And Ronan just doesn't have that size. I mean, I don't think he will. I don't think his body is built like Chase's. I mean, Chase was a freakish. I mean, you should see him dunking in high school. I mean, that guy was an insane athlete. I think Ronan.
I know he wasn't against the best competition coming out of Canada for basketball, but he averaged like 40 points a game.
It's insane.
It's nuts.
Again, I don't care what level you're playing at. You're pretty athletic when you score 40 points a game playing basketball. I don't care who you're 100%. Playing against. The thing about Ronan, I will say this. I think Ronan's a more natural football player than Chase was. Chase was always a super athletic guy that was trying to learn how to play football. I don't think Ronan is he's still raw as a receiver technically, but he knows how to play football, right? Like that's the thing with Chase was always like, it wasn't just learning route running for Chase. It was learning a lot of different aspects of playing wide receiver. And I think that's one thing that Ronan has going for him. And look, the reality is I'm a Broncos fan, right? So, I mean, I watched a lot of Ed McCaffrey in his career. Obviously at Stanford, he was a good player. He was a possession type of receiver. I'll say this. If you're going to talk about – so, like, Ryan, you made a comparison with Chase athletically and that I agree with it. I'm going to go here, though, with Chase. I do think Ronan's game can very much look a lot like Chase's game in college. That is where I think there could be a comparison. I don't think they're comparable. Their body types are different. All those type of things are different. But when you look at Chase was a guy that could stretch the field, I think Ronan can stretch the field. Chase could win contested throws. I think Chase has the potential to be that. Chase could make plays after the catch, and I think Ronan can bring that to the table. So, a guy that could play some W, a guy that could play some X. Because remember, Chase started at 3 different positions in his Notre Dame career. He ended up being their starter in the slot in 2018. He started at 2017. He eventually emerged as the starting slot receiver in 2017. Played some outside, but mostly played inside of the slot. Then in 2018, he moves out and starts at X with Miles Boykin at W. And then when Miles leaves and graduates, then Chase moves to W, and that's when he broke out. I think Ronan brings a lot of that to the table as well. I think he's more of an outside guy, but Ronan is a guy that I think when you look at what he did on a football field, I do think you can see some similarities to how he impacted the game and how Chase Claypool can impact the game. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan? Even again, different type of athlete, but as far as how they impact the game, where Ed McCaffrey was a completely different type of player than I think what Chase Claypool was.
Yeah, I think for me, Chase, he was a very raw player, obviously, early on in his career. And he's still a little raw, for being completely honest. It's just he's 6'4", 230 pounds, and he can run in the 4.4s, and he can vertical 40-plus inches. Like, he's just a insane athlete. I think from day one, Ronan Hannafin's going to give you a higher baseline as far as early on in his career, because I think he can be a multi-level threat. Like, I think that he can do those things down the field as far as a vertical type of player, but I think also you've seen him have the ability to get in and out of breaks. He brings a big catch radius where I think that he can be a short to intermediate pass catcher that can give you a lot of impact in that regard. And then I think that he can also do stuff in the run game, as a blocker, and I can do all that because he has that defensive demeanor to him, right? Because we talked a lot about that. He's a little more natural on the defensive side of the football than the offensive side of the football right now. So he's got a little bit of tenacity to him as a football player. So I think the impact early on, especially for Ronan Hannafin, can be maybe higher from a baseline perspective than Chase. And while he might not have quite the upside of a Chase Claypool, Ronan Hannafin is a really good athlete. Like, he has high upside. It might not be to Chase's degree, but not many people that have ever played have the highest upside as Chase from an athleticism perspective.
I could see Ronan's testing numbers being somewhat similar to Chase's when his career's over. But again, Chase did that at 6'4 plus 230 pounds, right? Yeah. That's where we're saying is like, because like Kevin Austin, just his numbers were almost identical to Chase's from an explosiveness and a 40-yard standpoint, right? But if you stand those two guys to get next to each other, Kevin Austin is a physical specimen. He is small when he stands next to Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool is a massive human being for a wide receiver, and that's the big difference there. All right,
I would say one person that I've compared him to in the past, Brian, that we've talked about is Alec Pierce from Cincinnati, who I thought was a really underrated athlete. And I was just going back to his combine performance. Alec he was 6'3". What exactly was he was? So he was 6'3", right around 211 pounds, 33-inch arms. So long dude. Ran 4.41, 40.5-inch vert, and had 129-inch broad jump. So he was a silly athlete. And I think that's what I think body type wise. And then, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Ronan's somewhere in that testing field. Yeah. Like, that's a pretty special athlete to his own right.
I personally have always shied away from that comparison because I feel like it's lazy because we're comparing two white kids. But the athletic profile fits, Ryan. Alec is 6'3", 211. That's kind of where we see Ronan. Long arms, similar style of play, can do some things after the catch. So it makes sense, even though I've kind of begrudgingly. I hate when people like compare two players and they always like, if it's a white guy, you always got to get a white guy. If it's a black quarterback, you always got to compare him to another black quarterback. I think it's lazy.
It's fair.
But I've tried to find a better comparison for him, and I just can't find a better one than Alec Pierce.
If you want to see the impact that Alec Pierce can have, just go back to the Notre Dame game last year. Like, that's all you need to know.
Yeah, no question. Got a super chat from Rob Osgood. Thanks, Rob. Hey guys, in the 24 class, what position besides receivers critical in getting? Also, as the 24 class as a whole, what positions are strong in talent? I'm going to answer the second one first, Ryan. I'll let you answer the first. It's still a little early to kind of know which positions are going to be really strong. Like, I thought last year that the tight end class in 23 was going to end up being really good, and guys just didn't progress and pan out. So it's a little bit early on that one. But I think it's another good year at quarterback. I think the one position that, to me, that stands out in 24, Ryan, is going to lead us right into the question you're about to ask. I have seen a lot, or about to answer, I have seen this looks to be so far a really, really deep year at wide receiver in the 2024 class.
It sure does. And I mean, Rob, obviously you talked a little bit wide receiver in your question, right? And I think that where Notre Dame, if they have 3 in this in 2023, then we're talking about 7 scholarship receivers potentially going into 2024. And I think that you have to have another big year. You have to have another 3 to 4 man class. And there's a lot of talent, to Brian's point. We talked about in nauseum about guys like Ryan Wingo and Micah Hudson and Emmett Mosley and Tyseer Denmark and Cam Williams. And there's so many talented receivers in that class. And I would honestly say, I mean, one of what was critical, Brian, honestly, Notre Dame already has it. They got CJ Carr at the quarterback, right? Like that is obviously critical. I would also say cornerback, I think, is another big one, right? Like I think that Notre Dame has continued to pile up good cornerback classes, but it seems in my opinion anyway, early on, really good cornerback class in 2024 as well. I mean, you got guys like Emilio Edgard and Caleb Beasley, and there's some really good corners on the board too. So that one could be another one where I think you have an opportunity to do really well as far as wide receiver and corner in next year's class.
And also to add to your corner discussion, Ryan, I think there's also a decent number of corners in the North and also regions that are friendlier to Notre Dame, like Tennessee, Caleb Beasley in Tennessee, Emilio Agard's from Jersey. There's 2 really good corners in Ohio, Austin Scott and Bryce West. Obviously, Ohio State's going to be, the considered leaders for them, but it's a good year in the North for athletes. And that's something we've talked about in the past as well. I think as we look at the 24 class, that's something that stands out too. I mean, there's a 5-star defensive tackle that goes to a really good private school in Chicago. That doesn't happen often, right? There's a top 100 caliber receiver at a really good high school in Chicago that Notre Dame already has in the class. There's the success they've had. I mean, they are off to a great start with 4 guys that I view are, that are 3 of them are ranked in the top 100 by at least one service. I think they're all top 100 caliber-ish players, especially Cam Williams, CJ Carr, and Brandon Davis Swain. And, all except for Jack Larson are from schools that are considered Notre Dame's backyard. I think New Jersey is not Notre Dame's backyard logistically, but it is from a recruiting standpoint. Because there's, as you know, Ryan, living there, there's a lot of natural transition to Notre Dame from a lot of Catholics, a lot of Catholic schools, a lot of private schools, a lot of people with, Italian backgrounds. There's a lot of favorableness. And I'm not even talking about players. I'm talking about coaches because they can be very influential. Go look at the name of Bergen Catholic's coach. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, dude, I think he's still the head coach, right? Now he might have left within the last couple of years, but so I think there's a natural I count Jersey as their backyard. That's a place Notre Dame should have success. And they're very good and they're very loaded in the 24 class. Because early on we were like, that's helping 23, but you can't repeat that every year. Well, then as we get to learn more about the 24 class, you're saying, dude, this is going to be another really good year in the North, which could really benefit Notre Dame because there's just a lot of players that kind of fall into that category.
I'm also excited and interested to see what the offensive line class looks like for 2024 because we've talked a lot about the board being a little bit smaller right now. Guys like Gerby Lambert, who's out of the state of Massachusetts, and Peter Jones, that's out of Pennsylvania, Malvern Prep. Interested because Notre Dame got a couple guys that maybe fit that tackle profile in 2023, hopefully, but I think it's really important for Coach Heastan and the staff to get a couple offensive tackle types in 2024. I think that's going to be vital because it might be a little bit of a smaller class. So I think that you really need to hit home runs as far as offensive tackles in the class are concerned.
Yep. Got some more questions here. Really good start so far. ICURN with Irish Luck. Still think Ausberry can be for the Notre Dame defense what Dean was for the Georgia defense, especially from a leadership and football IQ and getting guys lined up. This is one that Sean brought up this weekend too, Ryan, and I've been holding to ask you this until the show. I think their body types are a little different, but I think that is a very fair comparison. And I would argue that Jaden Ausberry is a better athlete. But as far as impact on the field, yes, I see a lot of Nakobe Dean in Jaden Ausberry. I wanted to ask you because obviously I know you've studied Nakobe Dean a lot in regards to getting ready for your draft prep. Do you think he can have a similar impact in not just playmaking, but the all-around impact that Nakobe Dean? Because I'll say this, Nakobe Dean might have been the worst draft prospect that Georgia had at linebacker last year, but in a Georgia uniform, he was hands down their best linebacker last year. And I would argue the best linebacker they've had since Raekwon Smith back in 17, I would make that case as far as just production and leadership and impact on the game. That's my stance on that.
I still believe that Nakobe Dean would have at worst been the second Georgia linebacker drafted, if not for the injury concerns that were kind of leading up to the draft. But there are parallels in the size comparison. And I think the biggest parallel for me, Brian, is that they have the intangibles to them, right? Like you can't quantify the leadership and the just football IQ that each of them have. And I think to your point, Jaiden Ausberry is probably a better athlete than Nakobe Dean was fine. He was a good, solid athlete, but I think that Jaiden Ausberry has a little more juice to him as far as a pure athlete than Nakobe Dean. So Nakobe Dean was a fantastic player, though, and the reason he was is that he was a ferocious player, played with a lot of instinct and a lot of physicality, and he was just always around the football, and that's what made Nakobe Dean such a really good player for Georgia, obviously last year. And I do see some of those similar traits with Jaiden Ausberry, but it might even be in a more athletic package. So it's a very interesting comparison.
Yep. Very good question. I appreciate that question. Got one up here from Archer, resident Ohio State fan. What is a realistic finish for the Notre Dame class? Who are the players and how many points will that class have?
So if we're working through just some of the key targets that are left, you're talking about the quarterback position. We talked a lot at this point about Austin Novosad, Kenny Minchie. I believe that Notre Dame is going to get a quarterback in this class. Whether it's one of those two, it remains to be seen. We will see kind of moving forward. Running back, Notre Dame is still high, and they are in a good position, in my opinion, with Jeremiah Love, the running back out of Missouri. They have Ronan Hannafin that is still on the board at wide receiver, which would hopefully finish up what is a gap-closing wide receiver group. Tight end, they're done. Offensive line, they're done. Defensive line, they're probably done. Linebacker, this show was dedicated to Jaiden Ausberry in the beginning, right? So that's the last piece to the class potentially at linebacker. They also have Samuel Mpemba, who's out there that could be a Rover, Viper, Mike, Will, like wherever he wants to play. He's a defensive athlete for Notre Dame. And safety, I mean, they're taking a look at Ben Minnick, right, Brian? So that's a guy that they're doing.
Ben Minich, right?
Minich, excuse me. Ben Minich, who they're doing their deep homework on. He's an Ohio safety, so might be somebody that there's worth keeping tabs on. We shall see. He's scheduled to visit for the barbecue on the 26th, so we'll have kind of updates on that moving forward as far as where things are trending with Notre Dame. So that's kind of where it sits, Archer. I think if Notre Dame closes on everyone they should close on, and let's say that they get a Austin Novosad in this hypothetical that is now rated as a top 100 recruit by a service, I still think a top 3 class is very possible. Do they have a claim for number 1?
Yeah,
it's going to be close.
It'll be tough.
I'm saying it's going to be close for number 1, but I think top 3 absolutely.
My response wasn't to you, Ryan. It was to the people that are just assuming Notre Dame can't have a number 1 class. And my point is, look, well, they need to land more 5-star players. Well, we just saw a couple guys jump way up into that 5-star category that are committed to Notre Dame, right? The other thing is I don't think people are putting enough appreciation into just how deep Notre Dame's class is in regards to highly ranked players. I mean, we're just talking about 17 of their 20 commits are ranked in the top 247 on the 247 sports rankings. And you look at the guys that we think they're going to get commitments from, they're all ranked in the top 247, right? So there's 2 types of ways to have a highly ranked class. Have a bunch of 5 stars and then a gap and then, a bunch of, and you're going to be ranked high because of the emphasis they put on 5 stars. The other way is just have like everybody in your class is ranked as a 4-star. And then you do have some of those. So when I look at their points, I think the way that things are progressing, I think they could get anywhere from like 297 to 300, which here's the other aspect of it too, Archer, is I think what a lot of people are missing is they're still working off the assumption that the top 5 teams are going to look a lot like the last 5 years. Well, if that's true, if you look at Notre Dame's number based on what we project, then they're going to finish. There was like in the last 10 years, there was like 2 years, I think they'd have finished second, and then a bunch of 3s and 4s, and then like 1 or 2 5s in some different years. But most often than not, like 3 to 4 range. But here's what I think we're missing. If you go back and look at if you go look right now where kids are committing to, Miami's taking kids that would have otherwise gone to Bama, Georgia, Ohio State. Not Ohio State, not so much, but Bama, Georgia. Tennessee's taking some of those kids that would have gone to Bama, Georgia, places like that. USC, not getting some of the West Coast kids. So I have a feeling, and again, I've pointed this out. You look where other kids are committing. There are a lot of kids committing. Now, flips could happen, but it's like for Georgia, for example. Georgia would have to close on a bunch of kids they're not considered the leader for right now and flip some kids to be able to get where they normally are. Why? Because some of the kids they've been getting, they're not getting. I have my reason why. I've always kind of felt like Georgia was involved in some nefarious stuff to get recruits. Just how I felt. Well, now they're not having as much success with that despite a championship because of coaching turnover. And losing Dan Lanning as a recruiter has had a big impact. And there's other guys on their staff. They lost the receivers coach going to LSU, big impact. And also because some other schools are able to kind of now buy guys, which, in a legal fashion. So I think that's impacting these classes too. Now, is Bama going to finish in the top 3? Yeah, most likely. But like Texas, I went the other day and I pointed this out or did this. I gave them Anthony Hill. I gave them Malik Muhammad. There's a top 100 lineman they're after. I gave them like 5 or 6 guys that they're crystal balled for, and then 2 that are top guys, and then some others, and they still don't get to where Notre Dame is points-wise. The only team that I've been able to have ahead of Notre Dame right now, if you give them all the guys they're projected to get and then throw in a couple others, is Ohio State, and that's by a point.
Yeah.
And the highest I've been able to get anybody to so far is like 298, and that was Ohio State. Because, again, I think the talent is being spread out a little bit more than it has in the past. I feel like a guy like Jaden Wayne, I feel like a year ago, Jaden Wayne type guys go to Alabama or go to Georgia. Now he's going to Miami. Samson Okalola goes to Alabama or Georgia. Now they still may get Samson, but now Miami's a player now. Tennessee's a player for some of these guys. Pre-NIL, does Nico sign with Tennessee? No.
No.
Does Jaden Rashada go to Miami? No. He goes to USC, Alabama, Oregon, A&M, something like that, right? And so that's the other factor to it. But I think right now, I think 2 to 3 is the most realistic, unless they can either pull off an upset we're not expecting, or Ohio State doesn't get a kid or 2 that they're supposed to get, which is, obviously still part of it. And Notre Dame could end up not getting a kid that we think they're going to get. That's part of how it goes. But I think 1 to 3 range is the range right now based on the numbers projections that I've been able to come up with. Right?
Wouldn't it be wild if Ohio State and Notre Dame had the top 2 classes in 2023?
They're so far ahead of everybody else right now.
I know they are.
I mean, even with all the, again, Bama's well behind in numbers now, right? Like they don't have the number of commitments, but like even if you go like to the team rankings for 247, the composite, right? Mm-hmm. Bama's had a run. They're up to 12, but they're still 11th.
Yeah.
They're really way behind where Notre Dame and like Ohio State is less than a point ahead of, less than a point. The top number is 286, right? So it's different than rivals where the number 1 is 2,697. It's just a different point system, right? But the number 1 team is Ohio State. Notre Dame is less than a point behind them. The next closest team is over 20 points behind them.
Crazy.
And so it's like they're really far off. And then when you go to rivals, as I pointed out, this, the Ohio State and Notre Dame are both first with 2,697 points. Texas is number 3. They're over 500 points behind them. And so, it's like Notre Dame has to not get anyone as they load up on highly ranked players. And that's after Texas went on this crazy run of getting all these top 100 guys, and they're still 500 points behind Notre Dame. And they're not that far behind Notre Dame in numbers. They're only 2 people behind Notre Dame in numbers. Mm-hmm. So it's not like Bama, you could make the case because they've only got 12, right? But Texas is at 18. Clemson's at 17. They're not like way behind Notre Dame, and they're still, as far as numbers, but they're still way behind in points. So I think Ohio State and Notre Dame have distanced themselves to the point where we're talking about where they're going to finish in the top 3 to 4, not if they're going to finish in the top 3 to 4, assuming they're able to keep this class together. That's the key for both of them. That's the key for everybody at this point in time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, very, very, very good question there. Brandon is a little fired up today, Ryan.
He is.
Brandon says Tamir Robinson, 247 is Tamir Robinson ahead of Drake Bowen. That is ridiculous. We both like Tamir quite a bit, but no, he's not. No, Ryan, I'm sorry. It's
a lot of projection.
It's a bad take.
Yeah.
Here we go, Ryan. Here's one for you because you've been all over this one. So as part of this answer, can you just kind of give the latest on things? But Seth Clark asks, what is your confidence level on Jeremiah Love as of right now?
Yeah, if you're on the board, I put I guess it was a couple weeks now at this point after his visit to Notre Dame, that Jeremiah told me that Notre Dame was in his top 2 schools and things were trending very well. And he really likes Notre Dame a ton. He wants to have a summer decision made. So this is something that we will know before fall as of right now. I think Notre Dame has a very good chance. And, on the board, I kind of speculated on who I think the other team is that's in the top 2. I don't really want to put that out in the universe. We'll keep that one on the board. But Notre Dame is in a really good spot. If I had to put a confidence level, I think, Seth, last time I talked about Jeremiah, Brian, I'm trying to remember. I think I said like 6.5 was my confidence level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm up to about an 8 now.
Okay.
I think we're trending in a really good direction.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Jeremiah has really great interactions with a lot of Notre Dame recruits on Twitter, and he's spoken so highly of Notre Dame every single time I've talked to him. And I know he had a really good visit with Notre Dame, and just with how things are trending, I'm starting to feel really good about that one.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yep. Notre Dame's done a great job, and the commits are doing a great job on him as well. You mentioned this. Like I think we need to be careful kind of putting too much sometimes on Twitter reactions and likes and all that. But that's one where not what we see on what you're seeing on Twitter with Jeremiah and his relationship with Notre Dame commits is what we're also hearing is going on a lot behind the scenes as well, which factors into that. 99 problems, but BK ain't one. Not trying to be petty. Legit question. If LSU had a different head coach than Brian Kelly, even Orgeron, do you think Notre Dame has a harder time pulling Ausberry away from LSU?
I guess it depends who it is. For the context, but I think that Jaden Ausberry was always very fine with leaving Louisiana.
Right. I'm not putting that on Brian Kelly. Yeah.
It's the same thing with if we did a hypothetical with Braylon James with a different coach out of Texas, right? It's like, right. I don't think so. I think Braylon James is just one of those kids that just doesn't care about staying close to home.
Right. And matter of fact, it was Texas being close to home was a hindrance to him in how he viewed it. It's not a shot on Sark. They're putting together a heck of a class. Some kids are just that way. I think Jaden, and I think also, from what I've been told, his dad has put zero pressure on him to go to that school. There's never been that kind of. His brother didn't go to LSU. His brother decided to go somewhere else. I believe LSU offered him and wanted him. So as much as I would like to take a shot at Brian Kelly, I'm not going to do it unless it's justified in this particular instance.
Right.
It is not. Although somebody put sent me a tweet earlier. Let me see if I can find it, about a comment that Brian Kelly made at the what is the SEC thing, right? And I have to find it, but it was something about somebody asked him if his thoughts on Notre Dame joining a conference, and he responded with, I got more important things to worry about, like trying to fix the slice I've been dealing this last couple of weeks. It's like, dude, you clown yourself and you don't even really realize it. You know what I mean? Like you're at the SEC Media Day and you're talking about your golf game. Like, all right.
I wish I could say what I actually feel, but yeah. I'll keep it PG.
It's good. It's a family show, Ryan.
Yes, it is.
Show. Zach Martin, who compares the most to Marist in the 22 and 23 classes? I think that's actually kind of an easy one.
You think it's an easy one? Okay, so let me take give a shot at it and then see if you agree. 2022, I would say the one that compares most in that class is Nolan Ziegler. Am I good so far?
I see where you're going with that, and where I think you're going with it, because you're going with length. Yes. I think where you're going with length, yes, very similar. I was going to go with Jalen Sneed, just because the explosiveness, but body type and explosiveness, yours makes a lot of sense. So maybe it's not as easy as I thought it was.
Yeah, I don't think it's as easy.
I think that's fair.
Because I'm looking at 2023 now. And there's not really someone that compares that well to him, to be honest. I guess I would say Drake Bowen, I guess, for like the versatility he brings in coverage. Yeah. I don't know.
I think they're very different type of players.
I think the Nolan one to a Preston Zinter or potentially a Jaden Ausberry, they're also very different athletes.
Yeah. I think to me, my first thought was Jalen Sneed, easy, just because the explosiveness, the pass rushing ability, the coverage potential, and all that. I was thinking that, but Nolan's an interesting. Yeah, Nolan fits well because Nolan is an explosive athlete as well, but he's very long, a lot like Marist. Where Jalen's got long arms, but he's 6'1". Nolan's got long arms and he's 6'4", which is much closer to Marist. So yeah, I think that one makes a lot of sense. It's a good one, Ryan. Very good one.
Mm-hmm.
99 problems with BK1. If Notre Dame lands Ausberry, how does the 23 linebacker group compare to the 22 linebacker group if you count Burnham as a Viper? So the 3 and the 3. I still give the very slight edge to 22 because I think Ziegler was criminally underrated. So yeah, we're going to base this off of what we think, not what rankings think, because you are correct. Nolan Ziegler was definitely underrated. So Ryan, why don't you take a crack at that? How does, if we're just talking about rankings wise and who was better, not fit together, because that's the ultimate goal, right? Is they fit together. But who would you say is the better group between 22 and 23?
Well, I'm going to compare them 1-to-1 as far as the positions they play. I think that might be a good place to start. So I'm going to start with Junior Tuihalamaka to Preston Zinter.
Mm-hmm.
I think Preston might have slightly higher upside if he taps into everything from a length perspective and an athleticism perspective. But I think that Junior Tuihalamaka is a better recruit, just kind of 1-to-1, right? So I'm going to give the edge there to 2022. 2023, if I go to Nolan Ziegler as my will or Drake Bowen, I will take Drake Bowen in that conversation. It's a very interesting one, but
we're
will
both very high on Nolan Ziegler.
Yes.
Very high, but
very
Drake,
high.
Yes.
And then
let me say this.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is Nolan completely outplayed Drake last year when they played head to head. Completely outplayed him. But my response is always going to be Nolan's a year ahead, right? Like that's, but that also, it's how they're used. But I just want to point out that Nolan Ziegler he's correct, is criminally underrated. But I think that says a lot about how high you and I are on Drake Bowen. 100%. That it's kind of we're both going to go with that one.
Yep. And then the last one obviously is the rover spot in this scenario. We have Jaden Ausberry in the class. So it's going to be Jaiden Ausberry versus Jalen Sneed. This is where it gets tough for me, Brian, because I think I would ultimately opt for Jalen Sneed just because his upside is so high. Mm-hmm. But if you told me that you thought that Jaden Ausberry is a better football player in high school than Jalen Sneed, I'd be like, okay, yep, sure. I'm good with that. So I would slightly defer to 2022 because that means I'm 2 out of 3 for 2022. But I do think it's a really close conversation, if I'm being honest.
I think if you were to even so, for me, it's kind of easy. It's 22. Just because, I mean, I go 2 out of the 3 I can give to the 22 class because I would put Jalen Sneed ahead because when I think of a prospect, I think the combination of floor and ceiling, and I think Jalen Sneed has a much higher ceiling. Jaiden Ausberry has a higher floor, but the overall, I still give the edge to Jalen Sneed as a prospect. Would I be shocked if Ausberry's better? No, but just as a prospect, I'm going with Jalen Sneed. But like you said, it's close. I graded them both as top 50 players. Nolan Ziegler and Drake Bowen, it's somewhat close, but I go with Drake there. The difference for me is I think there's a big difference in Mike. I don't think Preston Zinter has a higher upside, just for me, than Junior Tuihalamaka. I think he's probably a better natural athlete, but I think Junior's just a much better football player and just so instinctive. It's like what you talk. I mean, just the eye discipline, the instincts, the technique, the power. I just think all those things fit. So he's more of a natural Mike for me, which is kind of why I give the slight edge to 2022. But again, we're basing this, folks, off of how we've evaluated the 23 class after their junior years, whereas we're evaluating the 22 class after how they are as seniors, right? If I were to look at them after their junior years, my conversation would be a little bit different. And I'd probably go to the 23 class if we're just basing off of it at their junior film. Mm-hmm. But their senior film, I mean, Junior Tuihalamaka a jump for me as a senior. Jalen Sneed took a jump for me as a senior because he got to finally play some linebacker. Nolan Ziegler if we're talking about all these players, nobody had a better individual season than all around than what Nolan Ziegler did as a senior. I mean, you're talking about a kid that was a great defensive player who, against Drake Bowen's team, intercepts a bubble screen and takes it to the house. Kid also had over 1,000 yards receiving.
I was about to say he was a good receiver too, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, now here's the best part. The great thing is we don't have to say who's better, who's worse, because they're all going to be on the same team. And that's the exciting thing is they have upped linebacker recruiting a ton. But as of right now, based on everything we know about the 22 class and everything we know about the 23 class, I'd give a slight edge to 22.
Yep.
What's going to be interesting, 99, is ask us this again after their senior years, and I'm curious to see how it's going to be. That's going to be a very, very interesting conversation, see how these guys develop. Tommy Guns asked, Brian, how do you see Oregon's class shaping out since they got Dante Moore, the kid who shall remain unnamed? We'll go ahead and name him. It's Dante Moore. It's all good. They're starting to fill out. It's a small class right now, but they've got some good players in it. Really good receiving core so far. They got 2 really good wide receivers. The thing that hurts their class, Ryan, is they got a really good receiver named Kyler Casper, who's really talented, but he reclassified to 22. Otherwise, they would have 3 stud receivers in this class, or 2 stud receivers and 1 really good player.
Did Casper reclassify?
He reclassified.
I completely missed that one. Wow.
Yeah, he reclassified to 22. Got a really good corner in Cole Presley. Cole Martin's a solid player, a little overrated. They got a safety that I like a lot. Recently that's a pretty good football player from Texas. Tyler Turner, he's a good football player. It's a quality class. It's going to be about the finish. But, offensively, they've got a couple really good skill players that they needed. And Ryan, I know you especially. I mean, I like Caleb Presley a decent amount. I know you really like Caleb Presley. So that was a very strong pickup for them in the secondary, and they definitely needed that for sure.
Yeah, he's one of the best press man guys I've seen in the class, right? Like, he is just so physical, man. Like, and some guys just he's one of those guys that can take players into the seats occasionally, right? Like, he's one of those dudes. So having him with Dante, I mean, it's a good class so far. We'll see. Again, low numbers right now, but if it fills up and continues the momentum, then it should be a quality class, to your point.
Right. Yeah, it's they got to finish. We'll see how it goes. Here's a really good one. Who was better as a prospect, Jalen Smith or Keon Keeley?
I can't comment on Jalen Smith. I didn't really cover it. Like, I was just a very casual watcher of him. I mean, wasn't Jalen Smith the number 1 player in the class though? Like, he was.
No, he's like third.
Third.
Yeah,
okay.
Very similar ranking. Let me because I know Rivals had him. Pretty sure Rivals had him third. Let me just pull up that so we can give an answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Jalen's recruiting profile, he was ranked as the number 5 player in the country by 247, number 3 by Rivals, and number 7 by ESPN. Let's see who ESPN had ahead of Jalen Smith. Let's go look at that real quick. That should be interesting because he was part of the 2013 class. So of course ESPN's taking forever to load. I'll say this: they had Robert Nkemdiche, number 1, Ole Miss. Carl Lawson, number 2. Vernon Hargraves, number 3.
Okay.
Mackenzie Alexander, number 4.
Okay.
Laramie Tunsil, number 5.
Fair.
Matthew Thomas, number 6.
Oh, Matthew Thomas, former Florida State
Yeah.
great. Wow.
Yeah.
About Matthew Thomas.
I would say, coming out from what I remember of them, the only guys that I would even remotely consider being ahead of should have been considered ahead of Jalen. Tunsil was a phenomenal offensive lineman coming out.
Yep.
And then Robert Nkemdiche was I would have been okay with it, but I always felt with him, he was kind of advanced, and I wasn't sure how much better he was going to get.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a guy that I thought was underrated in that class, should have been in the top 5. Derrick Henry was a monster in high school.
His stats are the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen.
He was number 9. This was one heck of a class. Mm-hmm. It had Kelvin Taylor in it. It was a decent running back. Derrick Henry, Eddie Vanderdoes, Eli Apple, Sua Cravens. Jalen Ramsey was ranked 14th. Kendall Fuller, Laquan Treadwell, Kenny Bigelow was a good player before injuries set in. Max Redfield obviously was in that class. Keith Ford was a pretty decent running back in college. Alvin Kamara was in that class.
Pretty good.
Leon McQuay, he turned out to not be that good. But Shaq Wiggins, Jerry Conley from Ohio State was a really good player for them. OJ Howard was in that class. Chris Jones, kid who went to Mississippi State, now with the Chiefs, he was in that class.
He's now the second best interior defensive lineman behind Aaron Donald in the NFL. He's fantastic.
Von Bell was in that class. Joey Bosa was ranked 56th in the country in that class. Al-Qadim Muhammad was in that class. That was one heck of a class. Goodness. And I'm still in the 60s. I still say Torian Folsom had a heck of a Notre Dame career if not for the injury. I really, really do believe that. Ben Boulware was in that class. He just seems like he was older than that. He seemed like he's one of those guys that was just always like, that 8th-year senior kind of guy that Clemson always seems to.
Oh, he was
be able to find.
And then James Skalski was the new one of him.
Yeah, exactly. Ashawn Robinson was in that class. He wasn't even the top. ESPN's great at rankings. The number 109 player in the country is this running back out of Missouri, Ezekiel Elliott.
Oh God. Oh man. Wait, was he in that class too?
He
Elliot
was
was in that class?
109th.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Taco Charlton was 116th in that class. That's
Good
one
player in
heck of a
college.
class, man.
Yeah,
That is one heck of a recruiting class. Goodness gracious.
that is crazy.
Yeah, Notre Dame didn't think he could play. Isaac Rochelle was in that class. Notre Dame didn't think he was good enough to play running back. They wanted him as a corner. So
It's disgusting.
really, really, really wise decision. Really
Alvin
wise
Kamara,
decision.
Derrick Henry, and Zeke were in the same recruiting class, huh?
Yeah,
It's
it was
pretty good.
pretty good. It
Decent.
was pretty good. Yeah, it was a pretty good class. Oh man, fun years. Jake Butt was in that class. I would have liked to see what Jake Butt could have become if he didn't get injured. Tre'Davious White was in that class. He was ranked on number 186,
Wow.
2 spots ahead of Devin Butler.
Oh,
And Malik Zaire ranked 189th. That's absurd. That's absurd. He should have been higher than that. Mike Williams from Clemson, 201,
wow.
was number 201 in that class. That class was absolutely insanely loaded. But through it all, back to the original, Mitch Trubisky was ranked number 219 in that class. Through it all, back to the original question, Vita VA was in that class. The original question was about Jalen Smith and Keon Keeley. Jalen Smith, to me, was a top 5 player. Keon Keeley is a top 5 player. Here's how I would combine it. I think if we're going to talk positional value, it's Keon Keeley because defensive end is more valuable than linebacker. Sure. If we're going to talk who is the most more explosive athlete, it's Jalen Smith. And Jalen Smith's one of the most explosive athletes I've ever seen. Jalen wasn't necessarily a great high school football player to the level his athleticism would show, because he played like running back and just how they used him. They didn't like. Keon, to me, was a far more disruptive player as a junior than Jalen Smith was as a junior. I think Keon Keeley is in the last decade, honestly, Jalen Smith is the only prospect that's in the same category as Keon Keeley. That's it. That's how good Keon Keeley is, that we're having a conversation about whether or not, a legitimate conversation about whether or not he was or wasn't a better prospect coming out. Keon Keeley, to me, is a better prospect than Manti was coming out. And Manti was a star. Yeah. Keon is in that conversation. He is that good of a player. And he's a program changer, and that's why Notre Dame needs him, and they need to hold on to him. We believe they are. I'm not worried about that. I'm just saying we're still July, and there's going to be a lot of, for the next 6 months, 5 months, 6 months, or 5 months actually. There's going to be a lot of sweating about that. But yes, he is a guy that is absolutely in that category, Ryan, for me, of legitimate top 5, potential top 5. Keon's the kind of guy, that fits that category of, like, there's some guys, Ryan, that you and I rank really high. Jaiden Ausberry's one that my evaluation is 100% on college player.
Sure.
If I were to put, NFL projection onto it, which I think we should never do in rankings, I just don't like that. It's for college football. We're ranking them for college football. We'll do the NFL draft rankings when they're done with their college football careers.
Sure.
But I can understand a guy like Jaiden Ausberry, because I don't project him as like a future top 15 NFL draft pick, because it's just, it's a different game. Yes. But Keon Keeley's one of those few guys that I look at and I say he projects as an elite player on all of those. He's an elite high school player that projects to be an elite college player that projects to be an elite NFL player. That's how I see it.
You're not wrong. If you told me 4 years from now Keon Keeley was Chase Young or Myles Garrett or one of those dudes, I'd be like, okay, I believe. Yeah. He's 6'6", he's already 240. He's got long arms. He's explosive. Like, what's keeping him back from being that guy, right? It's just all about development at this point. So I don't disagree with that conversation at all. I think that Keon Keeley has everything you look for, not only in a potential high impact player on college level, but why can't he be the next great defensive ends coming into the NFL draft? Like, there's no reason he can't be.
And he's not a one-trick pony either. He's not a kid that's just going to be a great pass rusher the next level. Like all kids who are just juniors in high school, there's aspects of his game that have to improve technically. But Keon's a physical kid that I think also projects to be a very good run defender. You know who he is? He's to me, this is going to sound nuts, but he's Jadeveon Clowney with a motor.
It's fair.
Like, Jadeveon was thicker, but potential. When Jadeveon Clowney once wanted to be, he could dominate every phase of the game, run, pass, all of it, right? That's what makes Chase Young special. It's not that he's just a great pass rusher. Chase Young could dominate every facet of the game when he wants to, right? Sure. Not every guy is that way. And Keon, to me, can be that kind of guy. Keon has a chance to be the kind of guy. Yes, he's a pass rusher, and he's going to have a lot of sacks and all that. but he has a chance to be that kind of guy that can dominate every phase of the game. And there just aren't a lot of guys that can do that. Some guys can dominate one and they're good in the other. I'm talking about a guy that can dominate every phase of the game he wants to. And I'm talking about how they were in college. When Chase Young was on his game, you can block him. Now, he wasn't always on his game. That was the thing about Chase, is he would have games you're like, is this the same dude I saw last week? You know what I mean? Didn't happen often, but he would have it. And Jadeveon Clowney, you didn't know what you were getting from snap to snap, much less game to game, in college.
Such a frustrating player, man.
Yes. Player. I've never had that issue with Keon, right? Like I've had with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's kind of how I view him as a player. So it's a good question.
That's a good question.
MT41, is there going to be a point in Peyton Bowen's recruitment where the staff tells Bowen that enough is enough? No. Here's the thing. It's like the stuff I'm hearing about Keon Keeley. Somebody just sent me a DM that just flashed on my screen. And hey, there's a lot of stuff. Look, y'all, it's July, and these are sites who are literally, their business model is built around page views and clicks. That's what a lot of this stuff is. And the reality is some of these kids feed that. Keon does not feed that. Keon doesn't talk to the media. When was the last time you saw an interview with Keon Keeley? This is just people taking his name, and somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody's baby mama has said to Keon, look, I'm just telling you everything I've been told. There's nothing to worry about. That's what I've been told, right?
Yep.
Okay. But y'all can react to those things. And I understand it because there's this report and that report and the other report, right? But we hear this stuff all the time. Remember when Peyton Bowen was going to take an official visit to Michigan in June? And everybody's freaking out about that. He's going to take an official, just let it play out and just don't get caught up in those rumors. Because if I have reason to worry, promise you, I'll tell you. Y'all remember me talking about Amorian Walker last summer, right? When I was like, look, he's saying one thing to Notre Dame, but he's doing a different thing. I don't have that same feeling about Peyton Bowen. Am I guaranteeing you today that Peyton Bowen's going to sign with Notre Dame? No, because a lot of things can change, right? But I'm just telling you, from Ryan's conversation with people, from my conversation with people, I just feel Peyton has a hard time telling people that he knows and likes no. Right. But everything about it to me says Notre Dame is the place where he wants to be. I know his family wants him in Notre Dame, but he does have friends that are going to Oklahoma. And I think that's a harder thing for him, is like, my buddies are going there and he does like Oklahoma, but I do believe Notre Dame is the place he's going to be. I'm not concerned about it. I promise you, if we get legitimate intel that makes us concerned about it, we will put that on the message board and it'll matriculate to this show as well. So
that's a great point to say that you should join boards.irishbreakdown.com because if there is any reason that you should be worrying about Peyton Bowen, you'll be the first to know it from us.
Right.
So
otherwise, it's just a lot of this stuff is just,
To your point about even the Keon Keeley thing for a second, Brian, we've heard the Alabama Keon Keeley stuff twice already. Like, this isn't the first time we're hearing that smoke. Like, we literally heard that like 2 months ago, whatever it was. Like, Yeah.
Right. And I get it. Look, hey, folks, this is big time football, right? When you want Notre Dame to recruit this way, this is what happens, right? There's going to be kids at big time schools are trying to flip. When you recruit big time guys, they are clickbait material, right? The number 3 player in the country is going to be clickbait material, right? So yeah, you throw some out and then you can vaguely say something about this and it's a situation we're monitoring. And then when he doesn't flip, you can say, well, they made a run, things have changed. When in reality, you were probably running with something that you should have been running with in the first place. Like I said, am I guaranteeing you that anyone in this class is going to sign with Notre Dame? No, I'm not. But I'm just telling you, we have no legitimate intel that tells us one way. And this is from all sides of this. Now, maybe I look stupid in a week from now and things do change. I don't know. But I'm just telling you, based on what we are hearing, there's nothing to worry about. And I'm saying it now because I don't want this to be a thing now where if we don't address it, it gets brought up in every single mailbag where, what's the latest with so-and-so. They're committed in the class. They're telling the commits that they're in the class. They're publicly committed. They haven't taken official visits anywhere else. And they're saying all the right things to the coaches as well. And until that changes, I'm not going to feel the need to respond every time somebody throws a rumor out about something. And speaking of that, MT41 also says, has your confidence level changed for Hannafin? It seems like things aren't trending in the right direction. This is another example that I'm talking about. I believe Ronan Hannafin is torn between Notre Dame and Clemson. That has been true for a while. But because he hasn't committed to Notre Dame, the perception is, and what's being reported, is he's now trending to Clemson. When in reality, what's actually reported from the few times people have sent me stuff and what I know is it's not that he's trending to Clemson, it's that Clemson has narrowed the gap on Notre Dame. And I think most Clemson people that I know, that from what I have been sent and who I respect, have said that they still think Notre Dame leads. But then that turns into it's trending to Clemson. I don't believe that to be the case. I do think he's having a tough time deciding. I still think Notre Dame leads, but I'm not as confident in that now as I was a month ago. And we have reported that on the board, by the way. But as of right now, I do believe that Notre Dame still leads, but they got to close, right? And that's the key. They got to close on him, just like Jaiden Ausberry, just like Jeremiah Love. They got to close. But that situation's different because he's uncommitted. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little different than some of the other ones.
Agree.
All right. Ryan, I'll ask you this. Blaine Tiller asks, other than Stuckey, which first-year position coach has wowed you the most on recruiting? Yeah, let's not quite go there yet on Stuckey. He's got to close out on Ronan Hannafin first.
Sure.
Once he does that, then I'll say I'm wowed by him because he basically got two kids that he already had a relationship with before, which is good. It's important. Mm-hmm. But let me see him close on Ronan Hannafin, and then I'm like, yep, dude is legit. Now, what's your answer other than Coach Stuckey? What first-year position coach has wowed you the most on recruiting?
It would probably be Coach Washington, Al Washington, new defensive line coach. I think he's only continued to stockpile the 2023 class, obviously with Boubacar Traore and Devin Houston, because Brennan Vernon and Keon Keeley were already committed when he first got the job. And then he had the first two commitments in the 2024 class, obviously with Brandon Davis-Swain and Owen Wayful. So that would probably be my answer, Brian. I'll say this, though, kind of to throw in another name. Dylan McCullough would be a close one for me if he's able to land Jeremiah Love and also get Jaden Lamar, since if you had a 1-2 punch of Jeremiah Love and Jaden Lamar, I think that's kind of like an underratedly good job by Dylan McCullough if he's able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would put them there. And then, of course, Harry Heastand's putting together a heck of a group as well. But, I mean, they're all doing a good job. Jared Parker's in a unique situation because there wasn't room for him to make a 2023 impact, but he's got a kid in 2024 who's
he also still had to smooth everything out with Flanagan as well, you know. So I think he's done a good job as well. I would say so.
Yeah. I think I would have liked to have seen Coach Washington close on Jason Moore. I kind of ding that a little bit because I felt like you had the lead and then lost him, and so that's a little bit of a blow. But he's off to a great start in 23 and 24. He's got to hold on to the guys in 24. That's going to be a big part because the two of the four kids committed were already in the class. But he's doing a good job. They're all doing a good job. They just got to close. I like your point though about Dylan McCullough because not only is it Lamar and Love, but he also got Jabron Payne, and that's looking like a really good pickup now with all the injuries Notre Dame has had at running back this offseason. So he'd be another one, Ryan. I think that's a good point. If he gets Jeremiah Love, yeah, you've got to throw him into that conversation.
Agree.
I'll ask you this one, Ryan, and I know you don't have an answer, but try it best you can. From Notre Dame 2164, why does Brennan Vernon keep dropping in the rankings?
Look, I think we went from Brennan Vernon being slightly high on what was the one that ranked him as a 5-star to begin.
Rivals. Well, they didn't have him as a 5-star. He was number 7 player in the country. Rivals.
Gotcha.
They didn't have like that. Yeah, but he was a 5-star composite early on because of that.
Right.
But no one actually ranked him as a 5-star.
Right. So he was ranked a little too high. That kind of made the composite go a little higher. And now we've gone full opposite direction here. And now he is criminally underrated. Brennan Vernon, for me, has always been a top 100 player. Like 75, like if we can talk 75, 100, wherever, I think that he's a really, really good football player. And I think he has top 50 upside. Like I really do. I think that he is a extremely gifted football player. What's hurting him the most, I think, is the fact that he's not one of those camp guys, right? Like he's not going to go to this event and that event and this other event. And I think his game's a little underappreciated, to be honest, because he kind of has that lunch pail feel to him, physical grinder. So I think when you kind of couple all those things together, that's why the fall has happened mostly.
I think there's a couple things. To your point about the game, I think part of that's on his high school coaches. They did not use him well. They used him as a gap eater and not as a guy to attack with. I think that they didn't use him properly. Not only is he not a camp guy, he doesn't do interviews. He has zero social media presence. There's nothing in it for them to have him ranked where he is ranked.
Yep.
And I think part of it is, I think there's just some bad evaluations. He's got a weird athletic, like he's got a weird gait. This is something that I thought why it took some too long to come around to Michael Floyd. Because if y'all remember, it wasn't until Michael Floyd dominated that the Army All-American Bowl, including against Patrick Peterson, who at the time was known as Patrick Johnson. It wasn't until then, and he just ended Boubacar Sissoko's career at an All-Star game, that people finally started putting Michael Floyd up to a 5-star, which is where I thought he should have been. And part of it is because he had a weird gait. He had just that weird running style where it just kind of had that long galloping kind of thing. You didn't realize how athletic he was. And I think that kind of held him down a little bit. And, I think the fact he picked Notre Dame hurt him, because I think there's this, well, if, from Ohio, if he's that great of a player, shouldn't he go to Ohio State? I think there's a lot of factors in it, but I think Ryan hit on a couple legitimate ones. He doesn't go to camps, and he's not a guy that had great production last year because of the way he was used by his high school team. So I can understand him dropping in the rankings a little bit, but the manner in which he's dropped, like, maybe you drop him from 60 to 110, but to drop him into the 200s and then out of the top 250 altogether, to me, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And I'm very curious. And then I'm like, but I don't think he cares. From everything I know about Brendan, I just don't think he cares about stuff like that. He's going to go out there. He wants to win. He wants to, produce, and he wants to get to Notre Dame and do the same thing in Notre Dame. I don't think he cares what those people think, which is why he's just so unengaged in that process. I mean, so it's partly on him, but I commend him for it, because good on you for not giving a crap what recruiting rankings think, because it doesn't matter. It matters what Al Washington and Al Golden and Marcus Freeman think about you as a player, not what Brian Driscoll or Ryan Roberts or anybody that works for those other outlets think about him. But yeah, here's a good one from John Leahy, Ryan. Brian and Ryan, is there a greater risk of misevaluating when taking commits before their junior season or missing out on a late bloomer? Yes.
John, this is a good question. I actually had, so if you're on the message board, I put out just kind of like recruiting talk this morning just to kind of get the conversation going. And someone asked a similar question to this, Brian. They talked about, what's kind of too early to have a kid as a take, because kids are getting offered now. I mean, we just had Jaden Greathouse on, and he was offered, scholarships when he was a freshman in high school. And we've talked a lot about some recruits that are getting offered when they're in 7th, 8th grade at this point. So it's kind of a much different world. I do think that there's some misevaluation at times, because it's hard to predict how much a player is going to grow and develop physically, right? Like, I think that can lead to some misevaluation, but I think there's also, that's why you have to project as much as possible, because then I think there is a threat where you get to a certain point and you are going to miss out on a late bloomer, and you're going to kind of not be able to project. I think that's why it's important. Like, I mean, we've had a couple kids that commit to Notre Dame. It's like, there are 6'4" kids. I'm thinking about guys like Joe Wadding and Owen Wafel's even shorter, like 6'2.5", 6'3", but both their fathers are like 6'6", 6'7", right? So like, could they have another growth spurt left? It's very possible. So John, it's a fascinating conversation, because I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer here. I just think it's very dependent on one by one situation. Like, there's some kids that are done developing at an earlier age. There's some that are late bloomers. That's what makes the recruiting side very tough and very difficult to kind of predict.
I think a part of it is you have to be careful how you evaluate a guy, because the mistake I think people make, Ryan, is when they take that young guy that's like so much bigger and stronger, and and you like, this guy, this guy's kind of tapped out. Like, that's different than taking like a Keon Keeley before his junior year, because with Keon it was the opposite. He's this long string beanie kind of guy that you have a lot of talent with, who then he was the late bloomers from relative to when he committed. When Keon committed to Notre Dame, no one had him in the top 100, which we thought was kind of nuts at the time. But like, the thing for me, Ryan, is you remember when Texas started this under Mac Brown. Texas started this whole taking kids early thing. The problem was they were taking guys that were advanced, and they were physically advanced and all that, and then they weren't developing. They weren't panning out. And so then Texas ended up having high classes, but they weren't great because they didn't get a whole lot better. I think the thing that, like Ryan pointed out, Notre Dame taking guys early, they're taking some of those guys that are down the road, like developmental guys, as well as some of the guys that are just already kind of like Boubacar Traore is highly ranked, but he's raw. Brendan Vernon's kind of raw. Keon still has a lot of, he's still kind of raw. Peyton Bowen, I mean, we've talked about him. He's another guy that like technically is really raw. There's a lot of room for growth. I think that's the thing that I like, Ryan, is they're not taking a lot of like, wow, that's a grown man like that. Well, they're not taking a lot of that. And I think that's when you got to get worried. But I think more so to the 2024 class, yeah, I think there is some concern when you're taking guys that are sophomores. You haven't seen them play their junior years. You have to be very careful. But I think the thing that Notre Dame has done a good job of so far is they are taking guys with the ceilings, not so much the guys like Texas was taking guys with super high floors. They're not with the guys with high ceilings. And I think that's what hurt them. And then they were filling up so early that they didn't have room. Notre Dame's not quite doing that. They're filling up before their senior years, but even then they're not going to be completely full. There'll still be room for a kid here or there. I also think too, the difference now, Ryan, is with the advent of 7-on-7, you're not seeing as many late bloomers now because guys are playing skill players. Right. Linemen, it's still true. But from a skill player standpoint, you're not because these kids are so much further along than they used to be because they play so much more football. I think that kind of fits into it a little bit as well. Very good question. Very good question. Got a couple of super chats down here. Let's get to Ryan from TJ Fallon. Thank you for that, TJ, very, very much. I hear Notre Dame needs a quarterback. Yeah, they do. Well, I'm 27, 5'11", and can throw a beer can in the trash can from the couch. Brian, can you put in a good word for me? Sure. I'll get on that right now, TJ. You got it. I appreciate the super chat. And yes, Notre Dame does still need a quarterback. I'm pretty sure that probably not going to get a phone call from the Notre Dame coaches, TJ. I'm just going to be honest with you. So sorry about that.
Maybe you can grab a beer with me.
Yeah. Yep. No question. Let me see here. Yeah. Ian Johnson's trying to get on my good side because he was pass off some of our message board information in another chat the other day. Is if Brian Driscoll were thank you for the super chat, Ian. If Brian Driscoll were a high school prospect transitioning from quarterback to his natural position of receiver, I'm offended by that comment. I was a quarterback. I don't care what you say. In college, who's your comp and why is it DK Metcalf? I had absolutely nothing in common with DK Metcalf. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I have no comps.
So which undersized slot receiver are we going to?
I mean, you want to call me Hunter Renfrow or something, I guess. I don't know. I ran a 4.59.
Maybe Cole Beasley. I don't know.
He's more quick and shifty than that. Yep. Yep. I'm a little taller than that. Isn't he like 5'9" or 5'10"? How tall is Cole Beasley?
I think he's like 5'10". Sounds about right.
A little bit taller than that. So, but no,
he was also like a string bean, man. He's like 170 soaking wet.
Yep. Yeah, I was like $185 when I got done with college. My senior year, I bulked up to like 195 because I had a really bad offensive line. So I was like, let me put some weight on. So I really bought, and I was back to 185, 180 by the time camp was over with.
Maybe you're Danny Amendola then. Danny Amendola.
Yeah, there you go. All right, back to real life. Alan Watson, hey, Ryan and Bryant, how did so many people miss on Joe Burrow?
I didn't cover Joe Burrow's recruiting. I know he was he was considered like a 3-star by most people, right? And
it was like ranked, I think, 288th overall on the 247 composite. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, Brian, because obviously you covered it, and or at least you saw it. He's a kid that isn't incredibly gifted. Like, his arm is solid. It's not a great arm, though. He's a good athlete, not exceptional athlete. So I feel like he probably fell through the cracks a little bit, or at least from a recruiting perspective, because he isn't just the most physically gifted. Where Joe Burrow excels is the mental side, the accuracy side of everything.
Right. I also think we have to understand guys develop different. I mean, Joe Burrow, he still signed with Ohio State, right? And got beat out by Dwayne Haskins. Dwayne Haskins was a pretty good player. If Dwayne Haskins, I'll say this, if Dwayne Haskins had Joe Burrow's mind, he would have been, again, obviously he's passed away, but in college, if he had Joe Burrow's work ethic and mind, he would have been, even better, but he was a really good college quarterback in 1 year. I think there's a reason. Urban Meyer, who's a pretty good coach, picked Dwayne Haskins because Joe Burrow wasn't the guy that he was in 2019. Go look at Joe Burrow's first year as a starter at LSU. When he was a senior, he passed for under 3,000 yards, like 17 touchdowns or something like that, Ryan?
It was like 16-5
right.
interceptions or something.
Guys just develop differently. And then the light went on a little bit for Joe, and now he's an outstanding quarterback and has continued to, from what I understand, Ryan, he's been pretty darn good in the NFL when he's been able to stay healthy. So guys just develop differently. Not like you said, how did every team in college football except Wyoming miss on Josh Allen? Because Josh Allen as a senior in high school isn't Josh Allen now. If you go look at his numbers in Wyoming, they weren't that good. Right? He just was a late bloomer, and that happens sometimes. It just is part of the deal. Here's one, Ryan. You and I were talking about this off air. Did we talk about this at the beginning of the show? But we are not Marshall, says Brian and Ryan. We talk about missed opportunities. That was what we're talking about in the show on Saturday. Did Justice Haynes have zero interest in Notre Dame? He's a private school kid who is an excellent student. I think this was a little bit before you kind of started jumping on board. There was a lot of talk early about that.
I had some good conversations with his coach. Remember when it first started?
Okay.
So yeah,
I never felt that the Notre Dame, like he always talked highly about Notre Dame. Justice did, but I never thought it was a legitimate interest. And I think he liked a lot of things about Notre Dame, but his dad played at Georgia, and he was just going to stay in the South. I even didn't necessarily buy some of the Ohio State stuff, and he ended up finishing second. But I mean, as far as just picking Notre Dame or picking Ohio State, but he had interest. Caleb Downs has a lot of interest in Notre Dame. I don't think he's going to pick Notre Dame, but just because a kid doesn't pick a school doesn't mean he doesn't have interest. Some kids are just like, hey, I like a lot about Notre Dame, but I don't want to go to school there, right? I don't want to, whatever the case may be. I also think that, to be completely honest with you, Notre Dame didn't have as much interest in him after Dylan McCullough came on board. And, he's a good football player, but I always thought he was a little bit overrated, to be completely honest with you. When, some people I think had him like in the top 50. I never saw that. I think the gap between Justice Haynes and Jade Lamar is not as great as the gap between them and like Richard Young.
That's fair.
Right. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it.
Yep.
So 99 problems became one. Do you think 7-on-7 in camps matter more for quarterbacks, receivers, and corners? I can't see how they can matter for any other position. For those three, though, maybe, because you can see route running, technique, etc.
I don't have a great opinion on this, to be honest. I think one thing that I always like, because I mean, a lot of ways it becomes almost one-on-one situations in these scenarios, right? And that's kind of where I like to watch cornerbacks a lot, because I think that really kind of shows when a cornerback's in a one-on-one situation, maybe in man coverage, and then you just kind of see the athleticism, you see the hit fluidity, the ability to turn and run, like all those types of things. So I like to isolate those players, 99 problems. So I think you can get something out of wide receiver, but I think more than anything, quarterbacks can go through their progressions, but you don't have a rush, and it's a lot different. I think for me, cornerback is probably one where I say, like, I can get a lot out of just seeing them kind of move out there on an island.
Yeah. Look, I think anytime you get to see a guy move around, there's value to it, right? Like as a coach, I would go watch kids play basketball. If it was a lineman, you go watch them wrestle. You watch kids at track. I mean, there's anytime you can see a kid move athletically, Ryan, there's value to that evaluation.
For sure.
The problem that I have is that they put too much on it. So do they matter? Yeah, they matter. I think they matter for linebackers. I think sometimes 7-on-7 is the only time you actually get to see a linebacker open up and drop underneath the hook route, because he's not doing it in high school sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It can be the only time you see a guy go out in space and cover. Like the only time I've ever seen Jalen Snead cover is at a 7-on-7 coming out of high school. Like that was the biggest question mark I had. He played defensive end as a junior. I've never seen that kid run with a wheel route. Well, then you get to see him at summer camps. Like, okay, he can flip his hips really good. He can run and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think there's value in it. I think the problem that I have is it should be it's kind of like the combine in the NFL. I think you see the teams that constantly miss, Ryan, and they miss because they're always looking at the testing, and they put too much of an emphasis on it, as opposed to it's just another data point to evaluate a kid. If you watch film of a kid and you say that's a top 50 player, and he struggles during a weekend at a 7-on-7 and you drop him way down, that's an evaluation mistake, because there's a lot to go into it. Like there's just all types of factors that can play into account. Now, if you think a guy's a borderline top 300 guy and he comes to a camp and blows you away and you jump him all the way up, that's also a mistake. Because here's the biggest thing. If I have a receiver that's not real physical on film, and then I see him at 7-on-7, like, this kid's just really aggressive, it's because he knows he's not going to get hit, right? And there's a lot to it. Like you see DBs do things on 7-on-7, like that kid can't play that way in a real game. Like you can't do that. It's like running. Oh, did you see that guy during 1-on-1s? It's completely different. There's not 10 other guys on both sides of the field. I see guys like they'll make a move, and I'm like, you just got killed by a middle linebacker on the way you ran that route. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not a win.
I coached a kid. Sorry to interrupt for a second. I coached a wide receiver when I was in the high school level, where in 7-on-7, Brian, he would catch everything and he would make people look absolutely silly in the open field. Like no one could touch him. And then when you put on the film, when you put him on the actual field, can't win through contact, not physical at all, no catch point ability, will not block. Like it's just, it's.
You see that a lot.
He was made to play flag football, which is fine. It's no problem, but it's not the same football player he is on the field with pads on.
Right. And that's a big part of it. And it's like quarterbacks. I mean, here's the one thing I can guarantee you: every time I snap the ball on a 7-on-7, I'm not getting sacked. I'm not getting hit in the face by Keon, Keeley or Boubacar Traore or Brendan Vernon or Jason Moore or anybody else, right? And so it's like, yeah, you can see certain things, but it has to come with a grain of salt. Here's a perfect example. I talked to a couple guys that were at Elite 11, and I talked to a guy that was at the Future 50 thing. And what they told me, Jackson Arnold, Jackson Arnold is one of the best quarterbacks in the country in drills. But every time they put him in 7-on-7, he struggles. That's everything I need to know, that what I see on film is correct about Jackson Arnold. Really good high school quarterback. I don't see the projection to the next level, right? And that's the thing, is like 7-on-7 is a tool. And the biggest tool for me, if you're doing it properly, is with skill players, I want to see the guy move. I don't care about necessarily production or all those kind of things. I want to see him move, and I want to see how he reacts. Those are the two biggest takeaways for me for skill players. For quarterbacks, I want to see timing. I want to see anticipation. And that's about as far as you can go, because even then, I now want to see if you can do that timing anticipation when there's a guy trying to hit you and you have pads on. And it's like, guys that, Ryan, you talk about this, you'll see this all the time, half-speed heroes and camp heroes and stuff like that, like laying out for balls over the middle. And then, like you said, you get them in pads on and they're alligator arming everything because they don't want to get drilled. It's a different game. 7-on-7 is a different game than real tackle football. And that's why I think the overemphasis on how guys do at camps, especially camps where they do nothing more than 1-on-1s, is just a really bad way to evaluate if that is trumping film. It's just like the combine. If you see a guy that's a great football player, the combine is confirmation of that. But if you see a guy that's not good on film, but great at the combine, you should not bump him up. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. Trayvon Walker is a perfect example. Is Trayvon Walker a really good football player? Yeah, he is. But it's the combine that made him the number one pick, not his film, right? I would argue he's in the 20s if it's based off his film, maybe 15s. That's a big jump up to number one. And this is even on a greater scale, because you see guys that should be 3-stars that dominate at camps. And, and it's like, I remember I had this argument with rivals. Ronald Jones was a dude in high school, like 40 touchdowns, 2,000 plus yards. He goes to some camp in St. Louis, doesn't perform well. And I'm talking to, I think it was his mom I was talking to. She's like, yeah, there was like 30 running backs there. He got like 3 reps. He dropped the ball and they dropped him in the rankings. And then he goes out as a senior, dominates again, goes to the Under Armour All-American game, rips off like a 50-yard touchdown, and all of a sudden they're jumping him back up in the rankings again. I'm like, he was always that guy. You dropped him because he didn't do well on a camp that lasted a day. It's crazy. And I think that's the issue with it. But there's value to all those things, but it has to be viewed in the proper context. Otherwise, but in their defense, if you don't blow kids up from those events, then you lose the
appeal.
To have them go to it.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's the problem. And that's why it's a very tricky situation, and why I just don't put a lot of stock on those type of things, to be completely honest with you.
Very fair.
So we'll have to see how it goes. All right. Last few questions as we kind of wrap this up. All right. Here we go. Here we go. James Lawrence Zenzi says, a linebacker rotation of Bowen, Ausberry, Snead, Colley, Jr., Zinter, and Ziegler in a few years is going to be amazing. Yeah.
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 Man, I almost feel like it's gonna be hard to keep a hold of all those guys, but man, that is a
Yep.
embarrassment of riches right there.
Yep. James Zagrabic, I hope I'm saying that right. When Marcus Freeman, these are more comments, right? But I love them. When Marcus Freeman brings home a national championship this year, how does that impact signing day for 23 and 24?
Let's hope, Jordan. Let's hope we find out. That's all I have to say, sir.
Well, in all seriousness, though, I think the one thing is it helps you solidify potential flips, right?
Sure.
Like, the thing that Bama and Georgia and Ohio State can sell is, hey, when Clemson, we've won a title, come here and win a championship. Notre Dame's this, that, and the other. So, yeah, if they win a championship this year, it would help solidify that. But I think what it does is it just means you keep doing what you're doing. I mean, let's be honest. Notre Dame right now is recruiting like a team that's already won a championship. If they actually win one, what I think it means is this becomes the norm. Because that's what we don't know yet, Ryan. Like, is this going to be the norm? Like, if Marcus Freeman goes out and coaches and he's not the coach that he is as a recruiter and his staff the same way, maybe it doesn't impact him in 23, maybe not even 24. But after a couple of years, it's like, yeah, okay, great recruiter, but that's not a program that's really a championship team, right?
Right.
And it hurts them. And once you go out and win, okay, what do you use against Notre Dame at that point in time? It's
you
cold.
Can't use anything.
In the winter.
Yeah, that's literally the only thing. Is they have a great education, and they have a really good coaching staff, and they win championships. I mean, the next thing is going to be, but you're gonna have to buy a jacket.
South Bend's not as fun, or you have to. And then the answer to Notre Dame is always from Notre Dame that's always works is, okay, well, if you get drafted by the Packers, you're going to tell them no. Right. I mean, it just Last question, Ryan. We're going to have a 2024 question, and that is going to be from Tyler Bengi. Ryan and Brian, which 3 to 4 2024 receivers should Notre Dame target?
It's a great question because me and Brian were actually talking about this last night about a few of the wide receivers that are on the board. So in a perfect world, I mean, obviously you have Cam Williams that's already in the class. That's going to count 1 to the 3 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
The most impressive that I have seen so far, and this is really saying something for me, Brian, because this board is silly, my man. It's just a crazy, crazy board of talent. I think that we could have a good conversation between Ryan Wingo and Micah Hudson on who you prefer.
As the best.
As the best. Like, on any given day, I feel like you could pick one or the other, right? Like, Ryan Wingo's kind of the 6'2", bigger body, physical guy, can line up inside out. Micah Hudson that kid reminds me of like an Odell Beckham Jr. as far as like an athleticism perspective, a Garrett Wilson athleticism. Like, this kid is just springy, explosive, all the talent in the world. So Notre Dame, I would think, would like to continue the Texas pipeline. We've talked about that a bunch, right? So I would say to adding Micah Hudson and Ryan Wingo to a Cam Williams potentially would be fantastic. And then at that point, like, pick your flavor, like it's embarrassing at that. You want to stick in state and take a Mylan Graham, I'd be fine with it. Tyseer Denmark is a really talented player. Jeremiah McClellan's a good football player. Emmett Mosley's a guy that we've talked about a ton. Like, if one of those guys ends up being the 3rd or 4th receiver in the class, then wow, man. Like, so, I mean, obviously it's very unlikely that you get all 3 of those players to add on to a Cam Williams. But if there's some universe where Ryan Wingo and a Micah Hudson are on the same team, then I really don't care who the 3rd or 4th is, if I'm being honest.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's some guys I like. There's no doubt about it. But and the conversation that Ryan and I had last night was about, between Wingo and Hudson, is part of it depends on what your need is.
Sure.
Like, if you need that volume, big, dominant number 1 guy that's going to play boundary, then you want Wingo. I mean, that's 6'2", 195. He's going to be 205, 210 when it's all said and done. But if you need a guy that's like, more of a fast, explosive, shifty kind of guy, well, then Micah Hudson's your guy. So the answer to that is, well, then get both of them to go with Cam Williams. But you look at the board, Jason Robinson's a really explosive player. We've talked about Rob Richardson. We've talked about Emmett Mosley, if he's going to play receiver, which I think Notre Dame is recruiting him as a receiver, not a corner.
Yeah. Can I say one thing real quick about Jason Robinson? Because there was a question, I forgot to highlight it, but someone asked if Jason Robinson, who's a USC commit for 2024, if he's a realistic option. All I'll say is he's coming here on the 26th. You would know that if you were on the board. And he likes Notre Dame, and we'll
Right.
see. And he tends to play out the entire process. So I do think Notre Dame can get into that conversation.
Right.
Just to your point. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
So back to the question from Tyler Binge. He corrected me on the proper pronunciation of his name. I appreciate that. We always want to get that right, but there's just a lot of guys on the board, and it's kind of like you got to get from like the way I look at it, right? It's very rare that when you need 3 or 4 guys, you only target 3 or 4 guys. Like somebody said the other day, like, well, Notre Dame shouldn't have put all their eggs in so few basket at receiver. I'm like, well, they didn't. There was like 9, 10 guys on the board. They tried to get Cardinal Tate. They tried to get Tyler Williams. They tried to get they tried to get in on Kyler Casper. I mean, there's a lot of guys they've been in on, and now they're able to get some of these guys. And so they didn't just focus on 4 guys. It wasn't like they did a quarterback. And, so those guys that you mentioned, Mylan Graham's a guy that I like a lot. The kid from Fort Wayne, really explosive athlete. He's a Tysier Denmark, who I don't think he likes Notre Dame as much as Notre Dame likes him as of right now. But he's a guy on your list. And now, then there's Jeremiah McClellan, who's a good football player, not quite on the same level as some of these other guys on the board, but a kid that you still, to me, recruit to. And so there's definitely a lot of, it's a really deep receiver class. And so to me, there's a group of about 8 guys that includes, obviously you already have Cam Williams, but Denmark, Mylan Graham, Micah Hudson, Emmett Mosley, Bredell Richardson, Jason Robinson, Ryan Wingo, and you could throw some other guys. I mean, if they're interested, like, Ryan Pelham, if he's interested, Nicholas Marsh, if he's interested, Tysier Denmark, I already said, of that group, you got to get like 3 of them, right? Those are the top level guys, and you want to get more of the guys at the top of that group is ideally where you want to be. So that's and they got on these guys early, which is important.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's a big key is you got to get on these guys early if you're going to have a chance to get them. But I mean, if I'm talking about dream class, I can't have a dream class that doesn't include Ryan Wingo and Micah Hudson.
And Notre Dame has already gotten Ryan Wingo on campus twice, right. And he may be coming back for the 26th, still waiting to get confirmation on that. But I mean, obviously he has legitimate interest in Notre Dame if he keeps making the trip.
Right, no doubt. So it's about closing time for Coach Stuckey. So we'll see if he's able to. Hopefully, he can dip back into that Texas pipeline next year with Micah Hudson, because he is the reason I always focus about him, Ryan, is he brings that different skill set that they just don't have a lot of right now, and that's why I really like him.
Man, whether you're talking about as a deep threat, yak guy, winning at the catch point, like he is just an explosive athlete.
Yeah,
no
he is. He is special, no doubt. Well, that's going to do it for today's show, Ryan. As we get out of here. But actually, real quick, we did have a quick super chat from Matt Koister. I've heard we're installing new turf. That process has already begun. They were just kind of waiting for after the concerts and graduation and all that kind of stuff to employ that. It usually takes like a couple weeks to get that done. So I believe that process has already begun. So thank you for the super chat. But Mace K. Ryan takes us out of here perfectly. Join the message board, everybody, at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Hit the notification bell, subscribe to the channel. Share this podcast, give us a like, then subscribe to the channel, then hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate it. Visit the IB store. And as always, go Irish. Thanks everybody for being with us today. Tons of great questions. Really appreciate y'all very much. We can always continue on the message board if you're there, so you can always follow up with things. But until then, 6:00 tonight, don't forget, tune in tonight to IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean Stiers. He said the conversation tonight is going to be about Marcus Freeman's authenticity, and special treat for you. He interviewed Notre Dame baseball coach Sean Stifler, and he's going to play that interview tonight. So you will get a chance to hear directly from at Irish Breakdown, in a one-on-one interview with Notre Dame baseball coach Sean Stifler. So that's pretty awesome. That's how we roll at Irish Breakdown. So we'll have him on the show tonight as well. So I'm very, very, very much looking forward to that. So with that being said, everybody, have yourselves a great rest of your day. Tune in tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean Stiers. And tomorrow, Ryan and I will be back at 1:00 for the next edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast.